between the rise of anti-Semitism and these protests, and the way that the Jewish community, particularly in London, but I'm sure across Manchester and across the UK, feel afraid to be comfortable in their religion, feel afraid to even wear a yarmulke, feel afraid to identify as Jewish. This is a national disgrace, and I hope that the Home Secretary will move forward in tackling this, not just with words, but with actions.
Secretary.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments and her question. It's why I've been so clear that I don't want people in our country, our own citizens, to feel like they have to live a smaller life, hide away who they really are because they are afraid of attack, whether that is verbal or physical, or that they're scared that their children are going to be abused. That is not the future I want for anyone in our country, not in our Jewish community, not in any other community either. It's why I've taken the steps I have on protests. It's why I'm reviewing the wider legislation around protests and also on the thresholds for hate crime, because I know that one of the things that I've been hearing very clearly in the last few days is particular phrases that are used that maybe don't fall within our current legislation and are liable for prosecution but do create huge amounts of fear. I want to review all of that in the round properly to make sure that we have the most robust legal framework that does allow our precious freedoms to be effective for people in our country, that does accept that sometimes people will say things that are offensive, but where we know what the clear line is between that which is offensive and that which is criminal. And once I've completed that review, I will report to the House.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Home Secretary for her statement, her excellent statement. I'd like to pay tribute, if I may, to the men who were killed a week or so ago. And send condolences to their family, friends, and also to the wider Jewish community. As the Home Secretary has said, there is no place for hate crime of any sort to any group, to any individual. No place in the UK for this whatsoever. And of course, those who propagate hate must be held to account as well. So in addition to what the Home Secretary is proposing around changes and regulations to the Public Order Act, will she be undertaking a review of the Online Safety Act? Because this is a key way that messages of hate are propagated, and there's not enough being done to stop it.
Home Secretary.
My honourable friend is right to point out that the online space is a space in which hatred against minority communities runs riot, and you don't have to look that deeply in many of the groups that proliferate online. Whichever other hatred they say they profess, underneath is usually a cesspit of anti-Semitism. It is a huge problem for us. The Online Safety Act has some measures which are designed to begin to address some of the problems that we are seeing. I'm sure there will be more work for us to do in the future, but I think what we must first do is ensure that in our, as it were, real-world space, our legal framework is robust enough to tackle the threats that we see in our country on a daily basis, and then also review how those come to fruition, I guess, much earlier in the process in the online space. But I will be talking to my colleagues across government to ensure we're doing everything we can.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and join her in expressing solidarity with the Jewish community following this horrific attack. Diving into what's already been mentioned, does the Home Secretary agree that we must urgently address online spaces where hatred is radicalised and amplified? And will she work with the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology to review Ofcom's guidance, and more specifically on categorisation, as under the Online Safety Act, to ensure that small, high-harm platforms are also properly regulated to prevent the radicalisation that leads to such devastating attacks? Thank you.
Secretary.
The Honourable Lady will understand I won't make new policy at the dispatch box today, but I can confirm that I will be talking about these matters to the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, and I do recognise that the online space does pose a very specific challenge on all forms of hatred, but on anti-Semitism in particular, which proliferates across the political spectrum, left, right and everything else in between, and it is something I will be talking to colleagues in government about.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Tonight, Jews around the world begin the festival of Simchas Torah. 2 years ago on Simchas Torah, we witnessed the worst attack on Jews since the World War II. Today, we express joy at the hostage release, but also great sorrow at the massive loss of life during this terrible war. Now, anti-Semitism is widespread, as we have heard. Jewish children in rural schools, like those in Norfolk and Suffolk, are often the only Jewish children in the school. Indeed, I and my brother were the only Jewish children in our school. What can be done to support our teachers with the skills, the knowledge and the curriculum to educate all of our children on the terrible scourge of anti-Semitism?
Home Secretary.
Thank my honourable friend for his question. The Department for Education and the Secretary of State for Education have already made funding available to schools in order to tackle anti-Semitism within the classroom and to educate teachers on the best way to handle those conversations. I'm sure she will be saying more when she is before the House at next oral questions. But he should rest assured we recognise this as a society-wide problem. There are actions that my colleagues in the Department for Health are taking, particularly around the regulation of doctors, to make sure that our National Health Service is a safe space for patients of every background, including Jewish patients as well, work for Department for Education, as well as other departments as well. This is going to be a whole government response because it's a whole society problem.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the wake of the terrorist attack at Heaton Park, I'm very proud to say that Belmont Shul, in my constituency, hosted at the Sabbat service following a meeting of the Harrow Interfaith Council. People of all religions, representatives of all religions, stood together with the Jewish community saying that hatred will not be allowed to win. However, the Friday before that Shabbat service, I was horrified by the fact that just before Shabbat came in, I got frantic phone calls saying none of the synagogues had actually had contact from the police as to what would happen the following day. After some frantic phone calls, the police said, we can do drive-bys, we can do various things, but we can't have a permanent presence at the shuls on Shabbat. And the reason why? Because of the demonstration in central London by Palestine in Action, where the police knew they'd have to police these demonstrations and arrest the perpetrators, calling out support for prescribed organisations. So I think my constituents and those in London are fed up paying the money for these hate marches and hate demonstrations to take place. So in addition to changing the routes and the meeting places and the times when these demonstrations can take place, how about another suggestion? If they want to organise these hate demonstrations, let them have the bill for the policing that they have to have.
Well said, Bob.
Let me assure him I'm considering all recommendations that have been made by previous advisors to both our administration and the previous Conservative administration. I understand the call for those that do the protest should pay. One of the difficulties is on implementation rather than a disagreement on the substance of that issue. It's one of the things that I'll be looking at in the wider review that I am doing. It's important that whatever action we take doesn't create more work for policing, and it's why I've already had discussions with senior police officers across the country about what we should do going forward, and I can assure him I will review those measures very carefully, bearing in mind all the previous reports that have been written here, and I will ensure that the framework we are left with is one that is robust and also capable of being policed properly by the police themselves and has their confidence as well as that of the communities, because it's important whatever we do we have the resources to meet that. On the specifics of what happened with synagogues in his constituency, if he doesn't mind writing to me, I will make sure he gets a proper response.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I pass on my sincere condolences to the families and friends of Melvin Kravitz and Adrian Dolby, some of whom were in the gallery today earlier. But it's also important to mention what my honourable friend from Manchester Blakely said, which was the way Jews, Muslims and Christians came together, united in their revulsion and in their mourning in the wake of this attack. But just a few days before that attack, the punk band Bob Vylan told a concert in Holland, and I quote, "F the Zionists, get out there and fight, get out there and meet them in the streets." That's why I and other members in Greater Manchester have urged Manchester Academy to cancel the Bob Dylan concert that's due next month, because this band are a direct threat to the Jewish community of Manchester. And does the Home Secretary agree with me that that concert should be cancelled?
Home Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. He will understand that the specific decisions around whether concerts or other cultural events go ahead are independent decisions informed by evidence around the operational requirements of those events. They are made by safety advisory groups in those particular locations. It would be quite wrong of me as a Home Secretary to preempt either those decisions or also call into question the legal basis of those decisions by commenting on those from the dispatch box. It is important those safety advisory groups, wherever they are, take into account all of the factors around some of these cultural events and ensure they take the measures that are required in order to keep our communities safe. That is the job they're supposed to do, is the job that I hope they will do.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst the Prime Minister is swanning around Egypt, shamelessly trying to claim credit for the Gaza-Israel peace deal, we have the Mayor of London stating that the chant "from the rivers to the sea" is not anti-Semitic. I think it is anti-Semitic. Does the Home Secretary agree with me or the Mayor of London?
Home Secretary.
I really don't think the honourable member should have lowered the tone in that way. These are very serious matters, and we should all be united in this House in supporting the peace process in the Middle East, which undoubtedly has made progress in the last few days because of the actions of the American president and other partners in the region. One of the reasons why I'm reviewing the wider legislation in this area, including the thresholds for what constitutes a hate crime, is precisely because we have many contested phrases which currently, based on context, fall foul of being prosecuted. And I want to make sure that we have the most robust legal mechanisms, that hate speech and hate crimes are always prosecuted in our country, and those who propagate them do face the full force of the law.
Alex Serval.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by praising Melvin Kravitz and Adrian Dalby, who lost their lives defending the lives of others. In my constituency, we have 5 universities with 1,500 Jewish students, more than any other constituency in the country. We also have a Hillel house that was attacked in 2024 after a social media post by a senior politician. What will the Home Secretary do to protect Hillel houses on campuses up and down the country? And will she write to all the Hillel houses, reassuring them of their safety on campus?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I'm, of course, happy to support and write in the way that he suggests. I will, of course, do so in backing the work of the Secretary of State for Education, who has direct responsibility for universities. Let me just place on record, I think some members will have seen that the Universities Regulator did say on Friday that the Office for Students has powers to fine universities and ultimately to cut off public funding if they fail to uphold their responsibilities to keep students safe, and that includes our Jewish students on campus as well. So it's important that there is a whole society response. The university sector does need to step up, and I will make sure I work closely with the Secretary of State for Education to ensure that is the case.
Rebecca Smith.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly, how anti-Semitism is tackled by the police in our communities is key. So I'd be interested to hear from the Home Secretary what specialist training our police forces, and I appreciate this is a bit off-piece, the CPS, maybe the Justice, how it might be put on for a moment, are receiving to understand the complexity of investigating, charging and prosecuting those exhibiting anti-Semitic views early on, as there is a belief amongst the Jewish community that live near my constituency that far too many cases are dropped due to being labelled as having mitigated issues around concerns for Israel.
What I would say to the Honourable Lady is, having discussed these matters with senior police officers across the country, they do often take independent legal advice, but both on the decisions that the police have to make and then also in testing with the Crown Prosecution Service whether a prosecution is likely to result in a conviction. These are contested areas of public and political debate. It's why I want to review for myself the legislation that we have in place and will report to the House in due course.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I join with colleagues in sharing my condolences to the families of those who lost a loved one in the attack last week. Can I also put on record, and I think this whole House would agree, our support for the Community Security Trust, not just for the work they do tirelessly every week at Shul, but also for the cross-community work that they do. So many in our country right now want to divide people, want to find points to bring people against each other. That cross-community work is critical in keeping everybody from our community safe. On that thread then, one of the common themes that is coming out, and I allude to the comments of my colleague from Warrington, is this concern about misogyny and the record of many of those involved in violent offences of violence against women. I know her predecessor was pulling together a counter-terrorism strategy that was going to include this in looking at anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as well, and radical Islam. Could she update us on that review and where things have got to, so that we can be confident we will get all of these people off our streets and improve that understanding?
I can reassure her that that nexus between misogyny and in fact other serious offences, including offences related to extremism and terrorism, is something that we take very seriously. If she'll forgive me, having only been in the job a few weeks, I have not yet reviewed all of the counter-terror strategy, and it will now need to take account of the things that have happened in Manchester since then. But I can reassure her that our strategy will be published in the usual way, and we will of course consider the wider lessons to be drawn in relation to misogyny and violence against women and girls more broadly as well.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, and first of all, can I congratulate the Secretary of State on the forthrightness and the clarity of the message which she has sent from this House today. I think that people in Northern Ireland do appreciate how the deep hurt that is experienced by those who went to worship and found that they were victims of terrorism. We've had people machine gunned while praying, shot dead as they came out of church and their churches bombed, over 30 years of IRA violence, and we understand that. But will she join me in expressing disgust at those in Northern Ireland who the very same week that this occurred blocked roads and held protests celebrating Hamas terrorists who had carried out the atrocity 2 years previously? And in that kind of anti-Jewish hate, of course, drove the kind of action we saw in Manchester. And will she agree that we cannot allow, under the cloud of free speech, people to use the language which drives the sectarianism which is causing the hatred, the division and the loss of safety in the United Kingdom?
He's right, this country has had to learn painful lessons on sectarianism in the past, and it seems we have to learn them again in a slightly different context today, but this cannot be our reality in the future, and that is work that I hope all of us across this House can unite around. And let me also be clear, anybody who is celebrating and supporting Hamas, that is a proscribed terror organisation in this country. To support that organisation is to break the law of our land, and whenever anybody does so, they should face the full force of the law.
Barry Gardner.
Deputy Speaker. After the vile attack in Manchester, many of us in this House will have spent time with Jewish friends last week celebrating the festival of Sukkot. And it was particularly emotional to me to do that with friends and to realise that the Sukkah is that temporary shelter where we eat that meal, where you have to have sight of the sky, because the Jewish community need to be ready always to leave. And it's that sense of insecurity that is pervading the Jewish community now, which I believe the Home Secretary must most importantly address. Jews Free School in my constituency, the largest Jewish school in Europe, had a huge police presence outside of it in the afternoon on the Friday after that attack. And that was there to reassure them. But as many have said, that's a reassurance that should not be necessary, and we have to address that fundamental insecurity that the community are facing.
And let me assure him, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Whilst in this initial aftermath of the attack, it is important that we focus on reassurance measures and security measures. We are very clear that in the medium to long term, the only way to make sure all of our Jewish community are safe and that Jewish life in Britain can thrive, as it has every right to do so, is to make sure that we tackle the scourge of anti-Semitism across our country and deal with those wider questions of integration and community cohesion as well.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Speaker, can I congratulate the Home Secretary on an excellent statement in which very early on she said that the police officers involved are being treated as witnesses, which is absolutely right. But does she understand that there are many members of the security forces involved in this kind of work who fear they're going to be hung out to dry, and that many of them will not have their fears assuaged by the written ministerial statement today on the legacy of the Troubles, of which more anon? Will she reassure me that everything is being done by the Greater Manchester Police to put an arm around those officers who were directly involved in this, and that they will be given every support that is necessary?
I can assure him that those officers are being supported. It's why I wanted to make clear to the House today they are being treated as witnesses, and it's why I have asked the IOPC to make sure that they conclude this part of their investigation as quickly as possible. There are wider issues around firearms officers in our country having the confidence to do their job. We will soon publish our police accountability review as well, which is designed to make sure that we meet the scale of the challenge in terms of giving our officers the confidence they need to put themselves in danger for the rest of us. There are sometimes questions that have to be answered, and I think we can all accept that that is the case, but we should do that in a framework that commands public support as well as support of the professionals and is done in a timely way so that we can get answers quickly as possible and not have a debilitating impact on policing confidence in the long term.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend for her statement and also for a prompt response, which I know was appreciated by people in Manchester on the very day. I believe that people should be able to pursue their religions or none without fear of being intimidated or attacked. I also believe in the freedom of speech and the freedom to protest. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that people cannot use that right to promote hate and to promote violence against people of other religions or any other beliefs? And did she agree with me that we need to keep that under review to ensure that we don't allow those people to continue to promote these messages of hate?
His right to protest is a fundamental and precious freedom, and it should be protected, but it does have to be balanced against the need for all of our communities to be able to live in safety and security. It's why I'm doing that review of the wider legislation here, particularly around hate crimes and associated issues, to make sure that we know exactly where that line is, and that line and that careful balance that has to be struck is policed properly, and that prosecutions follow when that line is crossed.
Shaukat Adam.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I recently visited a synagogue in my constituency of Leicester South to celebrate Sukkot. But this year, the celebration was drowned in sadness as we paid respect to the terrorist attacks of two very brave men. We all condemn this attack because, as the Minister said, an attack on our Jewish community is an attack against us all. We are indeed stronger together. But does the Minister agree with me that acts of terrorism should not be used to pit communities against each other, and conflating the right of peaceful protest with the actions of a crazed terrorist, we are in danger of doing just that? So what steps is she taking to ensure there is greater community cohesion that build bridges and not build walls?
I do have to say I disagree with him. I was very clear that the protests that took place immediately after this terror attack, especially in Manchester itself, were fundamentally un-British. I hope he would agree that sometimes imagining it was you that had suffered and extending a hand of friendship, love and solidarity to a community that is suffering is the kind thing to do, it's the right thing to do, it's the British thing to do. And I would have wanted to see organisers of those protests in Manchester in the immediate aftermath of the attack and across the country at least show some of that very British solidarity. That doesn't mean to say that people are not allowed to protest. They are, they have been, I'm sure they will continue to do so. But sometimes I think a little bit of solidarity solidarity and kindness can go an awful long way.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to extend my condolences to the friends and families of Adrian Dolby and Melvin Kravitz, the people of Manchester and the wider Jewish community across the United Kingdom for the appalling terrorist attack at the synagogue in Heaton Park. Many in the Jewish community felt that this attack was not a matter of if, but when. Of the 1,521 anti-Semitic incidents recorded by the Community Security Trust in the first 6 months of this year, 76 were violent assaults, which were so severe as to be recorded as extreme violence, meaning they involved a threat to gross bodily harm or threat to life. Can my right honourable friend say a little more about what she is doing personally to tackle the scourge of anti-Semitism in our nation?
Well, firstly, let me say, as I have throughout my statement, anti-Semitism is at unacceptable levels. It is rising and has been rising for some time, and it demands a different and new answer from all of us in government and across society in order to tackle it effectively. That means in the immediate aftermath of the terror attack in Manchester that we provide reassurance to the community for their safety and their security, but longer term it means we have to work across government to tackle anti-Semitism wherever we find it, whether that's in the National Health Service, whether that's on our university campuses, whether it's on protests and marches, where we hold the line between action which might be offensive but is lawful and that which is lawful, a hate crime, and must be prosecuted under the law.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Section 12 of the Public Order Act already allows the senior police officer to place conditions on a protest march, such as by rerouting it, if a march will be noisy, disruptive or intimidating. So can the Home Secretary clarify what she meant with her comments about Section 12? When she talks about addressing the cumulative impact of the marches, is she still talking about allowing the rolling anti-Israel marches to go ahead just by different routes? Or does she want to give herself the power to stop them altogether?
The measure that I've announced will be about placing conditions on marches, both under Section 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act. What became very clear to me in the immediate aftermath of the terror attack in Manchester was there was inconsistency of practice across policing forces in the country as to whether cumulative impact could in fact be taken into account when they are making their decisions as to whether to place conditions on a march or a protest or not. The legislation I propose will make explicit that cumulative impact is in and of itself a feature that policing can take into account in order to put conditions on a protest. On the wider question, that is why I am reviewing the broader legislative framework. I will have more to say about potential bans, although he will know from his own time at the Home Office there are consequences to policing and banning of protests as well as there are of allowing them to go ahead and having conditions. And again, it's one of those areas where I think a careful balance needs to be struck. I hope there might be cross-party agreement on how we get that careful balance and how we hold it and ensure that the police are able to police effectively wherever we may decide in the future.
Florence Eshalome.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement this afternoon and agree with her that anyone seeking to divide us will only unite us. And I join honourable members in paying tribute to both Melvin and Adrian's families. I also wanted to refer the Home Secretary to the comments from my honourable friend from Manchester, from Withershire and South East, in terms of looking at the issues and policing across the country. Sadly, the Home Secretary will be aware of the recent expose at the Met Police, who are responsible for some of the major counter-terrorism across the country. And it has to be very right that those seeking to protect and people who are reporting hate crime should not be the perpetrators of hate crime. And we saw some disgraceful behaviour in that expose. This week is National Hate Crime Week. Every community should feel confident to report to the police. But we know for every hate crime reported, there are many more going unreported because people do not feel safe and confidence with the police. Will the Home Secretary be looking at that issue in terms of some of the issues across our police forces?
My honourable friend refers to the BBC Panorama expose into the Met Police. This is the first time I'm able to place on the record my views on that matter. I was horrified, like everybody else, particularly at the situation at Charing Cross Police Station, which had been the focus of previous exposés and promises of change. I have discussed these matters with both the Mayor of London and also the Chief of Met Police. I am reassured that they are absolutely clear-eyed about the need to tackle the issues that were exposed in that programme. We are all united in our desire to root out from our police forces all those individuals who hold these horrible attitudes and who we cannot trust to police our communities safely. They have no place in our police service, and I am confident in the work of the Met Police going forward and also the Mayor of London and other partners working together that we will get to a place where we can be confident in our police forces, and I hope to work closely with members across this House on that issue as well.
Tom Morrison.
Deputy Speaker, and can I join the Home Secretary in paying tribute to CST and Greater Manchester Emergency Services for their response on the day, and particularly to those brave members of the congregation who ran and protected their fellow members. And can I also thank the Home Secretary for her quick response in coming to Greater Manchester. As a Greater Manchester MP myself, I know it meant a great deal to our community. I'm proud to have Yeshurun Hebrew congregation in my constituency, as well as North Cheshire Jewish Primary School. And I met with the rabbi the Monday before this horrendous attack, and we talked about the genuine fear in our community about the rise in anti-Semitism, which was a horrendous foreshadowing of what would happen at Heaton Park. I completely agree with the Home Secretary's point that more security should not be the answer, but we are in a situation where more security currently is needed. So can I ask her to assure the House that, and the Jewish community that greater resources will be given to CST, the police and local authorities to ensure greater visible protection around our synagogues and our local Jewish schools, not just in the immediate term, but as long as necessary to reassure the community that they are safe.
Let me assure him and the whole House we are discussing these matters closely with the Community Security Trust and with other representatives from the Jewish community. The Prime Minister and I will have more to say in the coming days about the medium-term picture on security and funding for places of worship in our country. Let me assure him this is something that we take very, very seriously. But in the long term, I know he will agree, the place we need to be is not simply providing protective security, but knowing with confidence all of our communities can go about their business without having to go through a security cordon before they do so.
Apsana Begum.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 89 years ago this month, the British Union of Fascists led by Oswald Mosley tried to march through the largely Jewish East End of London. They were marched off by people of Jewish, Irish and working class backgrounds in what became known as the Battle of Cable Street, uniting in protest against anti-Semitism. Following this month's horrific anti-Semitic attack and amidst a surge in the far right's targeting of minorities and the attack at Peacehaven Mosque, does the Home Secretary agree with me that we must tirelessly oppose fascism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and racism, and also protect the hard-won democratic right to protest, which was crucial to defeating fascists in Cable Street in my area, in a historic act of solidarity and unity in British history?
Well, I think she's right that acts of solidarity between communities to protect each other does reflect the absolute best of our country. As I've said earlier on in my statement, I think that there is a careful balance to be struck between the fundamental freedom and right to protest, sometimes for causes we can all believe in and sometimes for causes that are much more politically contested, but that is a fundamental freedom. It's one of the things that makes this country such a strong and free place to be, but there is a balance between that and the right for all of our communities to go about their business with safety and with security. And that is why I have made the announcement that I have on the Public Order Act, because I think the balance at the moment is in the wrong place, and I think we need to take some steps to correct that.
Sakib Bhatti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, can I thank the Home Secretary for that statement, but also over the last couple of weeks where she's dealt with an issue that I raised very promptly, and I thank her and her team for that. My thoughts and prayers go out to the Jewish community, and I thank those from the Jewish community who've reached out to me to speak about their concerns. I visited a Jewish school with the CST, and I think it was awful to see children, young British children, having to do drills to protect themselves from a lone wolf attack in 21st century Britain. It is clearly not, we are clearly not in the right place in this. And the sentiment of dealing with the root causes, does she agree with me that interfaith work has fallen off a cliff? That needs to be dealt with. But I'm also concerned about the raising of Palestinian flags in central Birmingham, closer to home, and also the hosting by Preston Council of a known Palestinian terrorist. All of these things contribute to the feeling that I was getting from the Jewish community, which is that they do not feel safe in this country.
Well, look, one of the things that has happened after this attack is it has shone a light on the burden that British Jews bear every single day just in order to live an ordinary Jewish life. And there is nothing worse than imagining little children in our country having to go through drills every day at school in order to keep themselves safe. And I would hope that everyone across this House can commit ourselves collectively to doing everything that we can to root out the evil of anti-Semitism, because no child should have to do what it has become ordinary and normal for British Jewish children in our country. That is a disgrace for us all. It shames us all, and it is something that we absolutely need to work together in order to fix. Let me say on interfaith work, he is right. In the last 2 years, many times people who have done interfaith work for 20 or 30 years have told me it has fallen off a cliff. There are no easy answers for how you get it up and running again. I think it will take careful, delicate work to bring people together again, to rebuild some trust between communities, between our Muslim and our Jewish communities. Let me be frank about that. I think with enough goodwill and a sort of British generosity of spirit, it is possible for us to get that work up and running. I do see it as crucial in tackling the scourge of anti-Semitism, other forms of hatred, and in making sure that our country is a safe place for people of all different communities. And I hope that is something the whole House will support.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share with members the joy at the hostages being released today, but the sorrow at the loss of Melvyn Kravitz and Adrian Dalby, and my condolences to their families. I join with the Home Secretary in condemning this attack and condemning anti-Semitism and racism. I met with our local rabbi last week to share my solidarity, and I'm so pleased that the congregation have received so many messages of support from across the community, from other faith groups, from the mosque, churches and other groups, and that there's a real support from the local police, which they are very grateful for as well. Does the Home Secretary agree that it's vital that we continue to send a united message that we support the Jewish community and their right to live and worship in safety, and the role we all have here in this place, in workplaces, schools and streets across this country, for we can all play a role in taking action against this?
I think it's natural that after a terror attack we might focus on the actions of those who still wish to cause pain and to do damage to our communities, but she is right. Millions of Brits since that attack have come together in a spirit of solidarity towards one another, whether that's in our churches, whether that's in our synagogues, our mosques and other places of worship, and those places that are community institutions and open to people of all faiths and none. It is those acts of solidarity that will ensure that we can be a strong country going forward.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When we allow Islamist hate preachers like Sheikh Al-Faizi to do speaking tours, it is no wonder British Jews in the UK no longer feel safe. In January, he had a platform at the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, despite the Jewish Representative Council raising their concerns. They were ignored, and in a follow-up meeting, the Chief Executive couldn't care less, a meeting described as an appalling tick-box exercise. It now turns out this Sheikh was one of only 10 people that a terrorist perpetrator of this attack followed on Twitter. There's a chance he was at this event in January. Can the Home Secretary advise what her department is doing to hold Andrew Bolt, the Chief Executive, and trustees of the Bridgewater Hall to account for completely failing to take the concerns of Manchester's Jewish community into consideration? It's not just the hate marches.
Thank him for his question. Forgive me, I do not know the specifics of that particular case. If he will write to me, I will ensure I discuss with the Security Minister and ensure he gets an appropriate response.
Patrick Hurley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, can I welcome the move to consider cumulative impact when it comes to policing the issues discussed today. It's a hugely positive move, and I hope it can be applied to static protests as well as marches. In the aftermath of the horrific attack on the synagogue earlier this month, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate undertook a piece of research that showed the shocking, but these days sadly not surprising, number of calls for further violence against Jews on the X social media platform. Does the Minister agree with me that those advocating online for the death of Jews and calls for synagogues to be burnt down is exactly the sort of content that the online safety bill is supposed to address? And does she also agree with me that it is utterly reprehensible for anyone to give positive publicity to those on social media calling for people to be killed and for buildings to be burnt down?
On the measures on cumulative impact, yes, they do apply to both static protest and marches. That's why they are measures aimed at both Section 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act. And again, as I said earlier in my statement, I'm very clear that the online space is not going to be a free space for anti-Semitism, which presents itself both on the left and the right and everything in between of the political spectrum. I will discuss these matters with the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
I echo comments across the House and extend my sympathies to the families of everyone affected. We as MPs and other commentators in the public sphere need to be vigilantly alert to the potential consequences of inflammatory language, as we recall, of course, what happened on the 2nd of October. And I would like to thank the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust and their work to show how anti-Semitic tropes place Jewish people in peril and how this is utterly unacceptable. Does she agree, therefore, that with free speech, which we rightly treasure, comes responsibility?
Yes, I do, and it's why I describe those protests in the immediate aftermath of the attacks as un-British. We have our rights, we can choose when to use them, we can choose whether we wish to cause pain to people or not, and I do wish that those individuals who were involved in the protests in the immediate aftermath had chosen to show a sense of British generosity of spirit rather than go on those marches that day.
Laura Kirksley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share the Home Secretary's condemnation of this terrorist attack, and I was pleased to join my Jewish constituents in solidarity at an event to mark Sukkot this weekend. It was particularly touching that we were joined by people of all faiths, including Hindus and Muslims, and they were there in solidarity, but also with anxieties of their own. One Hindu community representative said to me, "This incident makes us nervous that this could happen to us as well." So can I ask the Home Secretary, does she agree that the government's protections must extend to people of all faiths? And can she say more about what she'll do to ensure that people of all faiths can meet and celebrate and worship without fear?
I agree with my honourable friend. The government's protective security scheme for places of worship is open not just to synagogues but to mosques and other places of worship as well, and already makes significant sums available for the protection of mosques and other temples as well. And we are discussing closely with representatives from the community about what we might need to do going forward.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I associate myself with the tributes of those that were killed in Manchester, and also the invaluable work of the Community Security Trust, whose headquarters I'd visited, and my constituents in Esher and Walton, who have sent a wall of love and support in messages to our local synagogues showing how they absolutely reject anti-Semitism. The Manchester attacker was wielding a knife. My local police force in Esher and Walton have stressed to me the ease in which someone can obtain lethal knives, even with a pattern of criminal behaviour. We do not know what kind of knife it was or how they obtained it, but we do know that the Southport attacker purchased a 16-inch machete from Knife Warehouse, a retailer which, in the words of the inquiry chair, showed no curiosity at all about who it was selling it to. So it is clear that those who intend to commit violence can arm themselves with alarming ease, exploiting online loopholes that treat lethal weapons as ordinary products. Does the Secretary of State agree that we now need a far stronger and clearer approach to tackle the online sale and circulation of these knives, and to close the gaps that allow sellers to profit from them?
She will know we're already taking action in the Crime and Policing Bill in order to ban the sale of those knives. It is a little too early to draw wider lessons about exactly what happened in this case, but once more of the facts are in, I'm sure we will return to these matters in due course.
David Pinter-Dyczynski.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to commend the Home Secretary for her statement and join with her both in condemning this despicable attack and in sending my condolences to the families of Melvyn Kravitz and Adrian Dalby. They are heroes. May their memory be a blessing. In Hendon, we have one of the largest Jewish communities in the country. Many of my constituents are scared, and I must tell the House in all candour that more than a few are asking whether there's a future for them and their families in this country. One of the sources of concern is the fear about bias towards Jewish patients in the NHS. Can the Home Secretary expand on the action the government is taking to ensure that all may be treated in the NHS without fear and to stamp out anti-Semitism in our health system?
Well, let me say to him, it is an absolute outrage that any patient in our country might be afraid of seeking treatment in our National Health Service because of the expressed views of the person who is treating them. And we are determined to make sure that that is not something that anyone in our country, including in our Jewish community, has to go through. And it's why the Health Secretary has already announced that he will be overhauling the regulatory system for medical practitioners. I'm sure he will come to the House in due course to give more details of that plan.
Dr Ali Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Green Party stands shoulder to shoulder in cross-party solidarity with the victims and survivors of the horrific attack on the Heaton Park Synagogue, and I'd like to pay tribute particularly to those who put their own lives at risk to bring it to a swift stop. The Home Secretary today has spoken passionately and personally on the point that the fight against the scourge of anti-Semitism is the same as the fight against any form of prejudice. I very much welcome that, and I'm sure she will agree with me that it's essential to say loud and clear and unequivocally that prejudice, hatred or violence against Jewish people is totally unacceptable in our country and will not be tolerated. The Home Secretary has used this opportunity, this moment today, to announce further restrictions on protests, which I confess do concern me. Important points have been raised in the Chamber today regarding the radicalisation within online spaces. Important points have been raised regarding radicalisation within online spaces. I would like to ask the Home Secretary, will she ensure that every policy measure she takes is focused on building solidarity between communities and countering division in our country?
I agreed with everything she said until she got to restriction on protest, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me just be clear, there is a balance to be struck between these freedoms. I think it's in the wrong place. I'm taking measures to bring it back into balance. I just repeat the points I've already made about the online environment, and it is something I will discuss with colleagues across government.
Yeah, absolutely. Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My condolences and solidarity and that of my constituents is with the Jewish community in Manchester in the wake of these terrible terrorist attacks. The Home Secretary mentioned regulators, and regulators such as Ofcom have a hugely important role in tackling anti-Semitism, not least online harm and hatred, as has been raised by the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust. Can she give an assurance that the Government has a plan to ensure that regulators are playing their full role in addressing the poison of anti-Semitism?
Why my colleagues in the Cabinet have been writing to the different regulators that report directly to them, and I know that they will all come before this House to set out the further measures and also the way in which we're going to hold people accountable for the powers that they have.
Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does the Home Secretary agree that the murderous attack on the Jewish community in Manchester was the product of the rampant Islamic radicalisation that we've seen across our country, something which chimes with the anti-Semitism that's been evidenced in the bitter hate marches in our capital city? And in that context, is enough being done to deal with the radicalisers? Do we not need to strike the axe at the root of this problem? And much of that root is those who are radicalising young people to do awful acts such as this.
Well, I would repeat to him the comment I made earlier in my statement on dealing with the domestic threats that we face, the largest of which is Islamist extremism. We will know more about the specific journey this particular attacker took before he carried out his attack when more of the facts are in, but I can assure him whatever wider lessons there are to be drawn from this attack, I will make sure that those are understood and learned from, and that we have the measures in place to be effective in dealing with radicalisation wherever it takes place, including Islamist extremism.
Mark Sewards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do want to pay tribute to the Leeds Jewish Representative Council and the Jewish Leadership Council for organising moving tributes in memory of the victims of the Manchester attacks. I also thank CST for their tireless work to keep the community safe. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry to say that a few weeks ago, a speaker on the streets of Leeds during one of the protests called for all synagogues and all Jewish schools to be held to account for the crime of, as they say, harbouring Zionists. Shameful. This was the thinnest of veils, draped over an excuse to legitimise targeting the Jewish community. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that there is absolutely no place for such calls on the streets of Leeds or anywhere in the UK? And will she do everything in her power to enable the police to ensure that it doesn't happen again to keep the Jewish community safe?
I agree with him. Those comments are despicable and utterly unacceptable, and it's why I'm reviewing the wider legislative framework that we have in relation to both protests and also hate crime.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I, first of all, give my condolences to those who lost their lives as a result of the Manchester synagogue attack, and to those who suffer the trauma and the loss of their family. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for the strong and emphatic statement, and the Secretary of State today speaks for everyone in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland when it comes to condemning strongly by her words. I was absolutely sickened and shocked to hear the report on the Yom Kippur of the attack on Manchester and the loss of life that ensued. And it is an established fact, of course, that anti-Semitism in the UK is once again on the rise to such an extent that there are security details at all religious events. I can well remember in Northern Ireland after the Dartford Hall massacre, many churches, indeed probably all churches across Northern Ireland, who had extra security details on their church doors. But those dark days are behind us in Northern Ireland. But they're not behind our Jewish friends, and we've witnessed that in the last few times. So they require action, not words, and above all, honesty about the threat level against them. Just how will the Secretary of State provide assurances to the Jewish communities that are more than media soundbites, but are promises of safety that can be trusted? Thank you.
I can assure him and the House that this government will have action. We've already taken action. There will be more to come, and I know that will be debated in this House over the coming weeks and months, but this is not a moment for warm words. It is a moment for strong action, and that is what this government will deliver.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I agree with the Home Secretary that violence directed at any community, be they Jewish or Muslim, of all faiths or none, are attacks on our entire country, and we're united in condemnation of those who seek to divide us. And in fact, in Luton, we have strong cohesion because we have worked for many years to build it. Yet recent events, combined with increasingly open far-right and racist rhetoric, have left many feeling scared and vulnerable. Bedfordshire Police have stepped up patrols around different places of worship, but resources are limited. But I welcome the Home Secretary's comments to say this is being looked at. So can I ask her about any cross-government work around the community cohesion building that is done by our voluntary and community sector, and support for that?
Community cohesion is going to be absolutely vital, and it'll be an important element of work that we have to take forward in the light of the attack that has taken place. I'm happy to discuss with her and make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to feed in the experience of those in Luton.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join the Home Secretary and all members across the House in my unequivocal condemnation of the heinous terrorist and anti-Semitic attack against Jewish worshippers in Manchester, and I express my heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of Mr. Dalby and Mr. Kravitz. As a proud British Muslim, I would like to remind the House and those listening, the actions of these so-called Islamist terrorists were vile, unacceptable, but they have nothing to do with the religion of Islam and are actually in total contradiction to the teachings of Islam and the obligations of all Muslims. In my constituency of Dewsbury and Batley and across the country, Muslims join the Jewish community in being saddened and angered by the terrorist attack in Manchester, and in any and all hatred and violence expressed against any community and we stand in full solidarity with them. Will the Home Secretary said that the terrorist was not known to the police or to the Prevent programme. So will she advise this House what steps are being taken to address any gaps identified in our preventative measures so that such acts of terrorism cannot happen again?
The attacker was not known to counter-terror policing and had not been referred to the Prevent programme. Once all of the facts are in, we will be able to draw wider lessons. If we didn't know, as we didn't know him, the question will be, should he have been on our radar? And that is a question that myself and others in our security services will take very seriously. He was, of course, known to the police in the context of those 2 charges for rape, and the IOPC will now investigate all of his previous history in a non-terror context with the police so that we can draw those wider lessons.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to start by thanking the Home Secretary for her statement and paying tribute to everyone who helped defeat the attack last week. I'd also like to pay tribute for the Home Secretary for the leadership she's shown so early in the post. It's been fantastic, actually. But in her earlier reply, she lamented the decline in interfaith work across the UK. In Edinburgh, it's never been going stronger. The Edinburgh Interfaith Association do fantastic work to ensure Edinburgh is an inclusive city. And I want to formally invite her to meet them to learn about their work. Nonetheless, the Jewish community in Edinburgh are concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism. I met them last weekend, and I spoke to a young man who's proud to be Jewish, but he said he could not live his life openly. He was Jewish in the closet, was the phrase that he used, and I felt ashamed. So I welcome that the Home Secretary is looking at the threshold for hate crime, but can she reassure us that she'll be speaking to the devolved administrations to make sure we get this right across the UK? Thank you.
Speaking to all of our colleagues in the devolved administrations, and happy to discuss with him the wider lessons on interfaith work to be drawn from his own experience.
Luke Charters.
Speaker, the horrific terrorist attack at Heaton Park follows a decade where anti-Semitism has increased nearly every year, and the CST has confirmed that anti-Semitism is increasing on university campuses. In York, we have 2 fantastic universities where anti-Semitism has no place. Will my right honourable friend commit to working with the Secretary of State for Education to ensure that the universities across the country have all they need to root out anti-Semitism for good?
Yes, absolutely.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On an inspiring visit this weekend to Bromley Reform Synagogue, which serves my constituents in Dartford alongside the honourable members for Beckenham and Penge and Bromley and Biggin Hill, I was moved by the strong views of the congregation rejecting hatred across all religions and communities in our country. Can the Home Secretary, following her excellent statement, agree with me that it's vital we send a message to the Jewish community and every other community in this country that they will be safe and that the government stands with them?
Hear, hear.
I agree with my honourable friend, and I hope that that message has been heard today. There is obviously much work for us to do, but this government will not shy away from doing it.
Kevin Bonavia.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for a very powerful statement. I also send my condolences to those grieving for their loved ones in that horrific terrorist attack, an attack which has realised the fears of our Jewish community across this country. A constituent of mine in Stevenage wrote to me straight after that to say how scared she was for her husband who had gone to do security at Yom Kippur that evening. She also told me about how classmates of her son at school had wished he'd died in the Holocaust. She also told me about how people, other classmates, were talking about anti-Semitic comments during lessons in the Second World War. She also told me about not disclosing the fact that her daughter's party was for a bat mitzvah because she was scared about the response on that. These are the fears that our Jewish community are facing. So while I welcome all that this government is doing in its deeds, in law and in its resources, the harder thing is how do we call out these small acts, so-called small acts of anti-Semitism, because they start that way, but where do they end? So I would ask the Home Secretary, how can we encourage all of us to call that out?
Well, no act of anti-Semitism, big or small, is acceptable, and we must all call it out and challenge it wherever we see it. This government will act. We are already taking measures. We will take more in order to strengthen the response to rising anti-Semitism in our country. And let me assure him, the testimony from his constituent is devastating for all of us. It is a source of national shame that our fellow citizens feel that they have to hide in this way, hide who they are in this way, and we must all commit ourselves to doing everything in our collective power to ensure that our Jewish community can live a full Jewish life here in Britain in the 21st century.
Final question, Luke Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's statement today. Does she agree with me that slogans such as "Glory to our martyrs," "Globalise the Intifada" and "Zionists off our streets" are unacceptable and likely to encourage unstable individuals to carry out horrific actions and attacks on the Jewish people, such as the one we saw so recently?
Yeah, let me reassure him I am carrying out a review of the wider legislation around protests and thresholds for hate crime legislation to make sure that all of our legal framework is as robust as it needs to be, so that we can strike that careful balance between our freedom of protest, our freedom of speech, but also keeping all of our communities safe.
Right, we'll let the front benches change over. Right, before we come to the Minister's statement on the China case, before the Minister, I will wish to make a brief statement. Members will know that I've already put on record my disappointment that the charges against 2 individuals relating to espionage for the Chinese authorities have been dropped. Not only disappointment, but I'm very angry. It is of the utmost importance to me that all those who work in this Parliament are able to undertake their activities securely and without interference. I continue to seek advice from officials on what further steps might be taken to pursue the issue in other ways. I will be issuing an updated security guidance to members later today. I think there is something the government ought to be aware of. It is this Parliament that has been spied on. It is MPs who have been here. It is MPs' offices that have been infiltrated. And as it stands, what we have seen is the payment for spying on what I believe we should be protected. At this moment, I feel we haven't had the protection. I certainly don't blame the Minister. I know that he will be answering a lot in his statement and taking many questions. But I do want to put on record, I'm angry, I'm disappointed. My job is to protect Parliament. I feel we aren't getting that protection. I now call the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to update the House, with your permission, on the facts surrounding the collapse of the trial of Christopher Case and Christopher Berry. Christopher Berry and Christopher Cash. However, following on from the Home Secretary's statement, I also want to take the opportunity to express my deepest sympathies for the victims and families of those affected by the abhorrent terror attack that occurred at Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue in Manchester on Yom Kippur. Tragically, 2 members of the UK's Jewish community lost their lives. They remain in our thoughts, and I know the thoughts of the whole House at this very difficult time. I also express my gratitude for the rapid reactions of emergency responders, the security services and members of that local community. 2 days later, a mosque in Peacehaven, East Sussex, was targeted in an arson attack. Fortunately, no one was injured. My thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House, will be with members of that local community there as well. We remain united in standing against hate in all its forms. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I told the House in September, the government remains extremely disappointed by the outcome of the Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry case. I understand the strength of feeling across the House and share the deep frustration that these individuals will not face trial. While the decision not to proceed was an independent one made by the Crown Prosecution Service, the government remains gravely concerned about the security of our democratic institutions and is crystal clear that our Parliament must and will be protected from espionage. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I am announcing today that MI5's National Protective Security Authority will be taking further steps to protect our democratic institutions from foreign interference, and I will set out more details on that in a moment. Now, Mr. Speaker, since I addressed the House on the 15th of September, there has been correspondence between honourable members, the Government and the Crown Prosecution Service. There has also been widespread and at times wholly inaccurate reporting in the media. Mr. Speaker, I will address the details set out by the Crown Prosecution Service and the basis on which the Government provided evidence to support the case. But first, let me underline a fundamental point, one that has too often been overlooked in recent days, including by the party opposite. The CPS brought these charges under the previous government under the legislation that was in place at the time, the Official Secrets Act of 1911, an antiquated law that is clearly no longer fit for purpose in addressing the complex and sophisticated nature of the state threats that we face today. It has been clear for many years that this legislation has not kept pace with the modern state threats that we face today. It was evident that the Official Secrets Act was no longer fit for purpose as early as 2015, when Conservative ministers tasked the Law Commission with reviewing this antiquated legislation 10 years ago, Mr. Speaker. In 2020, the Law Commission and the Intelligence and Security Committee of this House were both clear that this legislation, drafted before the First World War, needed to be updated as a matter of urgency. It referred to espionage as any sketch, plan, model, article, note, document, or information that might be useful to an enemy. These terms are archaic in the modern threat landscape that we now face. That is why, on this side of the House, we supported the passing of the National Security Act of 2023 on a cross-party basis, closing the loopholes that have been exposed by this particular case. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Director of Public Prosecutions has written to the chairs of the Home and the Justice Select Committee about this case, and it is welcome that these facts have been set out. He has made clear that charges were brought in April of 2024 based on the law as it stood at the time of the offences. The Deputy National Security Advisor, a senior official with very extensive experience in matters relating to national security, provided a witness statement in December 2023 under the previous government. Further witness statements were requested and provided in February and July of this year. All of the evidence provided by the Deputy National Security Advisor was based on the law at the time of the offence and the policy position of the Conservative government at the time of the offence. Every effort was made to provide evidence to support this case within those constraints. Now, the decision about whether to proceed with the prosecution was ultimately taken by the CPS, who were hamstrung by antiquated legislation that had not been updated by the previous Conservative government.
Between front benches, please, this is very important. The serious matter we can do out the side chatter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the evolving nature of the state threats that we face, the DPP has given his assurance that the CPS were not influenced by any external party, any member of this government, nor any senior civil servant or special advisor working within it. And I want to be clear again today, as the government has before, that suggestions that the government concealed evidence, withdrew witnesses, or restricted the ability of witnesses to draw on particular bits of evidence are all untrue. The DNSA did not materially change its evidence and was under no pressure from anyone to do so. Mr. Speaker, What has changed is the CPS's assessment of the case law. The DPP has explained that the ruling by the High Court in a separate case, the Crown versus Rusev, ruled on the threshold for evidence needed to prosecute under the antiquated 1911 legislation. In light of this new judgment, the CPS independently decided to seek further evidence. But the fact remains that it was not the policy of the Conservative government to classify China as a threat to national security. As the Right Honourable Member for Braintree said as Foreign Secretary, summing up China in one word as a threat was, and I'm quoting, impossible, impractical, and most importantly, unwise. Now, I've listened with interest in recent days to advice from former Conservative ministers on how the UK should now define our approach to China. But I must remind them and the House that what matters is what their policy was in government. The previous government set out its position on China in the 2021 Integrated Review, where they described China as a systemic challenge to UK security. In the Integrated Review refresh of 2023, they described China as an epoch-defining challenge. That's why, and as the Prime Minister has explained, the current government's policy position was immaterial to the assessment that was made by the CPS. Now, ministers cannot retrospectively change policy that existed under the Conservative government. And as stated before, the CPS decision to drop the case was not influenced by any member of this government, nor special advisor or senior official. Now, Mr. Speaker, in this moment of profound global change and insecurity, these matters have led to discussion about this government's approach to China. So let me set that out before the House today. We must tackle the threats China poses, from cybersecurity attacks, foreign interference, and espionage targeting our democratic institutions, to the transnational repression of Hong Kongers in the UK. This government is unequivocal. The first duty of the government is to keep people safe, and we fully recognise that China poses a series of threats to UK national security. Yet we must also be alive to the fact that China does present us with opportunities. It is the world's second largest economy, and together with Hong Kong, the UK's third largest trading partner. The only way to act in the UK's best interest is to take a long-term and strategic approach. This means working in close coordination with Five Eyes and wider allies to build collective resilience against the threats that China poses, investing in our intelligence services and being unequivocal about our position on human rights. It also means developing a consistent and pragmatic approach to economic engagement without compromising on our national security. To that end, let me set out the recent actions the government has taken to strengthen UK security against state threats, including those posed by China. MI5's National Protective Security Authority has today launched new guidance to protect the UK's democratic institutions from foreign interference. The guidance will help honourable members in this and the other place, members of the devolved legislatures, local councillors, mayors and elected representative staff to better understand the nature of the threat. It also provides simple, effective steps for individuals at risk to protect themselves, their teams and the integrity of our democratic processes. This guidance will kickstart a wider cross-government action plan that is being driven through the Defending Democracy Task Force to reduce foreign interference and espionage threats to UK democratic institutions. This will be delivered in close coordination with the Parliamentary security authorities. Now, I'd like to take a moment to urge all members of this House to be alert and to follow the guidance. I also urge members to take up the National Cyber Security Centre's important opt-in service for members of both houses. The government also remains steadfast in its commitments to holding China state-linked actors accountable for wide-scale cyber espionage. In September, NCSC co-sealed a US-led technical advisory calling out Chinese state-sponsored cyber threat actors targeting global networks, including here in the UK. I can reassure the House that we continue to keep all tools under review and will act as necessary to reduce their threat. Now, Mr. Speaker, the government is also committed to legislate to further strengthen safeguards against foreign interference. This specifically includes a new elections bill to strengthen safeguards against covert foreign political funding. It also involves taking forward the recommendations from the independent reviewer for state threats legislation. Mr. Speaker, let me finish by reiterating this government's unwavering commitment to national security and to keeping our country safe. We will take all necessary action to deter those who seek to do us harm and ensure that the UK is best placed to tackle state threats. That includes threats emanating from China. I commend this statement to the House.
Yeah. The Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate myself with the Minister's remarks about Heaton Park Synagogue? And can I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for all the work that you've done on the security of members. No one has worked harder to protect the integrity of our Parliament. Mr. Speaker, the Security Minister, or Madam Deputy Speaker, I should say, the Security Minister is very well regarded. So I'm sorry to see him sent here again, making these arguments which will not wash. This is about the ineptitude of the government, and I cannot accept much of what he says. He's brought some updates to the House, which we acknowledge, but in essence, China spied on this Parliament, and they're issuing us with leaflets. This is not good enough. Mr. Speaker, there are members here today who have been spied on by China, who are sanctioned by China. Even the Deputy Speaker has been sanctioned. All MPs speaking today should be acting in the national interest, nothing else. Let's remind ourselves of what's happened. 2 men have been accused of spying on MPs in this very building. The CPS had what it felt was a clear and compelling case to prosecute. But the trial has collapsed because for months and months, the government has been refusing to give the CPS vital information. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This looks like a deliberate decision to collapse the case and curry favor with the regime in China. And instead of admitting this, the Security Minister has come here blaming the Official Secrets Act. But we know that the Act was enough to prosecute this case. Its deficiencies had nothing to do with the government's failures. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, may I remind the House how serious this is? If the government does not prosecute those who spy on us, it sends a message to the public that the government does not care about their safety. It sends a message to our allies who share intelligence with us that Britain cannot be trusted. And it sends a message to those who spy on us that they can get away with it. Let's look at the facts. First, the government blamed the CPS. The minister came to the House on the 15th of September. He claimed that he had only become aware of this decision that day and that the CPS decision had been an entirely independent one. He repeats that assertion today. He said, "I am not able to talk about why the CPS has decided to make this decision." He said it was not for him to speculate on the reasons. He told the member for Rutland to seek a meeting if she wanted to find out the reasons. But we now know, despite all he has just said, that the trial collapsed because the government refused to give the CPS what it needed, and the minister knew full well why it had collapsed. Because the Director of Public Prosecution has said he spent months trying to get the government to provide the evidence it needed. Second, they tried blaming the previous government. Just like the Prime Minister, the Minister claims the CPS couldn't prosecute because the last government didn't describe China as a threat. I cannot believe that he would actually say that. He knows what we said. He knows. Let me remind him, Madam Deputy Speaker, For starters, the 2021 Integrated Review described China as, listen carefully, the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security. The 2023 Integrated Review refresh said China posed, let's listen carefully, a threat several times. In 2024, the then Minister for Security said from that dispatch box that China poses a serious threat. But even if the last government had not said China was a threat, and it did, the government only needed to convince a jury that it was a threat. And he knows that. I am astonished that the Minister has repeated this nonsense today. The Minister and the Prime Minister's argument on this has been refuted by no less than a former DPP, 2 former Cabinet Secretaries, 1 a former National Security Advisor, refuted by 2 former heads of MI6, and a professor of public law at the University of Cambridge who said today that Minister's statements so far are misleading about the legal position. They are all clear that these people could have been prosecuted under the old legislation. Is it the government's position that they are all wrong and they're right? Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister references Crown versus Rousseff. That case last year he refers to in his statement made it easier to prosecute, not harder. And as the former Director of Public Prosecution says, recruiting people to spy on MPs of itself clearly constitutes a threat to national security. Only this government could mess that up. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, has a very close relationship with China. Are we supposed to believe that he was not involved in the substance of the case and discussions around that, as they say? What does that even mean? He was in those meetings acting in the name of the Prime Minister. Do they really expect us to believe that he never mentioned to the Prime Minister any of this at any point? Madam Deputy Speaker, we know from the CPS that they spent months and months asking the government for evidence they needed. The government says it was not the NSA who took the decision not to give it to them. So who was it? Who made that decision? Can the Minister answer that today? Is it seriously the government's argument that no minister knew anything about this until the trial collapsed? If this is the case, it is astonishing. But my suspicion, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that it is not the case. My suspicion is that ministers did know. They have the Chinese super embassy in their in-tray. They have £1 billion compensation they're allegedly being asked to pay for nationalising British Steel. I suspect that they have decided that closer economic ties with China were more important than due process and our national security. And if this is the case, if that was the decision of this government, then they should just tell us that and have the backbone to admit it. They should explain it to the public, they should explain it to the CPS, they should explain it to our international allies and let them all be the judge. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not going away. There is nowhere to hide. I wrote to the Prime Minister today and I'd like to know when I will get a response to my questions. And we have also written to the CPS to ask if this trial can be reopened if the government finally provides the evidence it's been holding back. We know that the evidence that the CPS needs exists. And if the government decides not to provide it, then we will know it is because this weak Prime Minister does not have the backbone to stand up to Beijing.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do find it genuinely astonishing that at no point the Leader of the Opposition acknowledged that all of these acts that we've been talking about this afternoon happened when she was in government, on her watch. And also, because I believe it's important to discuss these matters in a fair and reasonable way, I particularly made sure that she had early sight of the statement I was intending to give her ample opportunity. She clearly has not read the statement. She either didn't read the statement or didn't listen to what I said, because she's asked me a number of...
Order. This statement is very, very important, both to me and to my constituents. Please, let's hear the Minister. Minister.
Thank you. I took every opportunity to give her, as long as I possibly could, so that she could look at the points that we were seeking to raise today. And she's asked me questions that I answered in my earlier responses. And I say that to her because it's important, I think, that we seek to discuss these things in a reasonable way. Matters relating... right honourable gentleman sort of guffaws from a sedentary position. I think actually it is important that on matters relating to national security, we should seek to discuss these in a reasonable and consensual way, and that is the approach of this government. I'm genuinely really sorry that she's taken the opportunity to make a whole series of baseless smears this afternoon. But perhaps we shouldn't be too surprised, because the statement that we've heard from the Leader of the Opposition is sadly typical of what we've heard from some of her colleagues in recent days. Now, for days, the party opposite has been making baseless claims that this government deliberately collapsed an independent legal process through political interference. There's not a shred of evidence to back up any of those accusations that she's made. And I really don't think, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a responsible way to discuss matters of national security. I remind the Leader of the Opposition that whatever members might say this afternoon, we are here today because of legislation that existed under the previous government and because of policy that existed under the previous government. Now, the Leader of the Opposition referenced the letter that she had written to the Prime Minister. Now, because we want to take the opportunity to respond to her in a timely fashion, I'm going to do that now and respond to the points that she made to the Prime Minister earlier on. But in case that she has forgotten, it was the Right Honourable Lady herself in September of last year and said, and I quote, "I have shied away from calling China a threat." And that was the Right Honourable Lady. And she articulated that the previous government's policy as Business Secretary, saying in September of 2023, and these are her words, "We should certainly not be describing China as a foe." The Right Honourable Lady's own words. Now, a number of questions have been raised from the opposition front bench, including in the Right Honourable Lady's letter that she published earlier today. And I'm very happy to set out the government's response to the answers that she has asked. First, on the question of what ministers knew about the government's interactions with the CPS. Ministers were aware that evidence was being provided by the Deputy National Security Advisor to the CPS as they built a case for prosecution, as was first agreed under the previous government. Ministers and special advisors did not take decisions about that evidence, and they were not cited on the contents. The Deputy National Security Advisor was given full freedom to provide evidence without interference, as was the case before the general election. Second, on whether the Prime Minister was briefed by ministers or the National Security Advisor about this case. She asked that question in her letter. The Prime Minister has already confirmed he was briefed on this case by officials, not least because the case began under the previous Conservative government. Third, there have been various reports alleging that in a meeting in September, the National Security Advisor ruled that China could not be defined as a threat and took decisions relating to witnesses or evidence. This is simply untrue. Of course, the NSA takes part in discussions about national security and diplomatic relations. That is literally his job. But any discussions were on the basis that the case would be going ahead and how to handle the implications. The National Security Advisor was not involved in any decisions about the substance of the evidence. And in answer to the fourth question that was raised by the Leader of the Opposition, that means he made no decisions about the content of any evidence. Well, honourable members have asked for a thorough explanation, and I'm giving that to them. They might pay the House the courtesy of listening to the responses. So that means that the National Security Advisor made no decisions about the content of any evidence relating to the case itself. This was a matter for the Deputy National Security Advisor, a hugely experienced, highly capable senior official who provided evidence under the previous administration. On questions about when and I other ministers were aware that the case would not be proceeding, ministers were informed after the DPP had made his decision and shortly before reporting restrictions were lifted. the House will note that I came to the House straight away to make a statement. Finally, on the question of whether it might still have been possible to argue successfully in court that China was a threat, regardless of the previous government's position not to do so, that was a judgment for the Crown Prosecution Service. However, the Deputy National Security Advisor provided evidence reflecting the threats posed by China as the CPS built their case. And on the comments, and she referenced them, made by two former Cabinet Secretaries, I note they have both remarked that the Official Secrets Act was not fit for purpose. Of course, if the Conservatives opposite had been swifter in replacing it, we wouldn't be here today. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, safeguarding our national security is the most fundamental responsibility of this government. In 14 years of Conservative rule, they were slow both to update our national security laws and adapt to the national security realities that we face today. And if we were to follow the approach of the party opposite, to ignore China and to refuse to engage with China, that is what would undermine our national security. And we will always defend our national interest on this side of the House.
Yeah. Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I begin by expressing solidarity with the two previous Conservative chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committee who would seem to have suffered having two Chinese spies in their offices, and how very distressing and upsetting and threatening that must have been. The DPP's claim of needing further evidence from the government and their decision not to publish the China audit has, I think, become conflated and has resulted in a great deal of muddle and confusion and allegations that the government is soft-peddling on China. Before we disappear down that rabbit hole, may I perhaps take us back to basics, which is these men were charged, as I understand it, with an offence under Section 11C of the Official Secrets Act. And the offence is to pass on information which might be directly or indirectly useful to an enemy. Now, when the Crown Prosecution Service are building their case, presumably they had a witness, and presumably that witness was the Deputy National Security Advisor, who was there to answer the question, is China an enemy? And without that evidence, there is no point in charging them in 2024. And what has changed since 2024? We're told that what has changed is that an enemy is now...
Just be quiet.
This House will listen to the Right Honourable Member with some respect. Dame Emily Thornberry.
So it seems that there's now case law saying an enemy is a threat to national security. Frankly, that seems to me to be a lower test, not a higher test. But if in 2024 there was evidence that China was an enemy and the Crown Prosecution Service had made a decision to prosecute on that basis, then I cannot understand why there has been a change now. The only other answer is that the Crown Prosecution Service did not properly assess the evidence before making those charges. It does seem to me that moving away from all the heat and fury, those are the central points.
Well, I'm grateful to her. She talked about muddle and confusion, and she's right. There's been a lot of particularly ill-informed commentary in previous days, and that's precisely why the government proactively has brought a statement to the House today in order to set out the facts of this particular trial. And I'm very happy to be able to do that, but let me do that again for her. The DPP has set out the reasons at the heart of his decision not to take this case to trial. He believed the evidential test was not met. The DPP took an independent decision on the evidence, as was set out in his letter of the 7th of October. The DNSA did not materially change his evidence and was under no pressure from anyone to do so. And as her constituency neighbour, the Prime Minister has explained very clearly, the current government's policy position was immaterial to this assessment. It is only the government's policy at the time that the alleged offences were committed that is relevant. Now, she will understand that the CPS decision to drop the case was not influenced by any member of this government, nor special advisor or senior official. I have been crystal clear about that today. and the Director of Public Prosecutions has given his assurance that the CPS were not influenced by any external party. And as the government has already stated before, the suggestion that the government concealed evidence or withdrew or lent on witnesses are all untrue.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Matt Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for advance sight of his statement. Over the weekend, Sir John Sawes became the latest former intelligence chief to express disbelief at the collapse of this espionage case. And our intelligence allies are now also questioning whether the UK can be trusted to counter China's growing threat. It's vital that we have a clear answer on who in government is responsible for the failure to bring this case to trial. Sadly, instead of clear answers, we've heard ministers over the weekend delivering vague and cryptic lines to tape. The nation has a right to understand which figures within government were involved with it in this process, not to proceed with a prosecution. Now, given the minister's statement that the government has not concealed the evidence or suppressed anything, will the minister commit to publishing a timeline? Who knew what? When did they know it? Who said what and when? Will he publish correspondence between all officials, politicians and advisers involved with the CPS? If he will, we can gain the clarity that we need and the British public needs today. Can the Minister confirm again with full confidence that the Prime Minister or any individuals who act on his behalf played no role in any decision to prevent the supply of relevant evidence to the CPS that might or might not include words of gentle encouragement either way? We must learn the lessons from this appalling episode so that we can have confidence in the ability of our national security laws to protect our interests and protect our democracy. That is the job of us in this House. This is the only way to provide the British public with the answers that they deserve and that they demand, and to rebuild the UK's credibility with Five Eyes allies. So will the government commit today to holding a statutory independent inquiry into the China spying case? Now, we know China poses a clear threat to this country's interests and values. That view is shared by those of us on these benches, as well as our intelligence chiefs. Yet the government's approach to this case is only the latest example of its unwillingness to challenge Beijing's efforts, both to expand its espionage capabilities in the UK and to export transnational repression to our shores. It is time for this government to take the steps necessary to protect our interests and those of our citizens. Working with the CPS, will the government look at all legislative options to prosecute the two individuals involved? Those options are still available. Will the government today block the application for the Chinese mega embassy? And will the minister add China to the enhanced tier of the foreign influence registration scheme?
I'm grateful to him and I welcome him to his new role. As he may know, I'm a regular visitor to his constituency and I pay tribute to the important national security work that takes place there. He's asked me a number of questions and with great respect to him, I hope that he will concede that I have responded to a number of them already. I did, though, just want to pick up the point he made about releasing information, because I think that is an entirely reasonable question that he has sought to bring forward today. What I can say to him about that is it is not for me to make decisions regarding evidence in the publication which may still be used in any further ongoing legal processes. So I hope he understands the reason why I'm not able to commit to do that at the moment. I absolutely take issue with the analysis with regard to the government's relationship with China, particularly with regard to transnational repression. I hope he will accept that the government takes that very seriously. We've done a lot of work through the Defending Democracy Task Force to ensure that we have the right resources in the right place to protect all of those who live here in the UK from the impact of transnational repression. But I'm very happy to discuss that with him further. He specifically raised the importance of our Five Eyes alliance. And I agree with him the importance of that. That's precisely why the UK has just very recently hosted the 5 countries ministerial gathering here in London, where we cemented the excellent relationship that we have with our Five Eyes partners. We share intelligence with them on, as he will know, a very regular basis. That is a relationship that is in good health and has in no way been undermined by recent events.
Chair of the Justice Select Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government has made it clear that it regrets the fact that this case is not going ahead. While the Minister rightly says that the CPS acts independently when making charging decisions. Will he go further than regret and say that as a matter of law and evidence that this prosecution should have gone ahead and the issue of innocence or guilt should have been determined by a judge and jury?
A huge amount of time for the honourable member. The expression that I used both on the 15th of September and again today on behalf of the government was that we are extremely disappointed. That is the expression that we have used again today. I hope that he will understand, not least given the select committee that he chairs, that it isn't appropriate for government ministers to be giving advice to the Director of Public Prosecutions or the CPS on matters of law. The CPS, the DPP, are rightly independent of government. And frankly, we go down quite a dangerous road if we get into a situation of politicians and ministers seeking to advise them and seeking to influence their decisions. That is not the approach that this government will take.
First Select Committee, Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is a real threat at the moment to public trust in the criminal justice system following the collapse of this trial. So can I ask the Minister if he will commit that both himself, other ministerial colleagues and other advisers will cooperate fully with any scrutiny work that is done by either my committee or the other committees represented in this House?
I can give her that absolute assurance. The government and both of the departments in which I serve take very seriously the importance of parliamentary scrutiny. The Right Honourable Lady, I think, conducts herself as chair of that committee with great gravitas. And of course, I can give her an assurance on behalf of government that we will absolutely work closely with her and her colleagues to provide any information that they seek.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and following on from the point made by the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, it is vital that Parliament is able to examine what's happened here. The government has made a commitment to transparency. We have a wrinkle in the fact that the National Security Advisor has been appointed as a special advisor rather than as an official, which means that he is having to appear in front of a committee of this House in camera. This is far from adequate. So will the Minister commit to engaging fully with the committee corridor to make sure that the relevant committees get access to information, as is normal, in a reading room, in camera or in a COBRA situation, in order to make sure that Parliament can satisfy itself of the comments that he has made so clearly at the dispatch box today?
Well, I'm genuinely grateful to her for the suggestions that she makes. I hope that she knows and that the House knows, and I hope very much that Right Honourable members opposite on the front bench know, that my approach will always be to make as much information as I possibly can available to colleagues, whether that's through the Privy Council process or through other means. I do welcome the fact that the National Security Advisor will be giving evidence to the JCNSS. That will be taking place shortly, but very happy to look more closely at the suggestion that she has made and to give her an assurance that we will want to work very carefully with this House and with the committees of this House to make sure that they are able to do their important job of holding this government to account.
Duncan Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, can I say that, as my right honourable friend, the opposition, said, the 2002 and 2003 integrated reviews were very clear. All the officials in there, the security services, called and said that China was a significant threat. That was sufficient to give to the CPS, not even by ministers, but by officials. The question is why not? But the question I really want to ask is this absurdity about the role or lack of role of the National Security Advisor. The government says that he wasn't involved in any matters of substance, but I simply say, isn't it the role of the National Security Advisor that they are involved in all matters of substance when it comes to national security? So I ask, what's the point of a National Security Advisor who does then not involve themselves in matters of national security, as in this case, but instead we are meant to believe that the Deputy National Security Advisor is allowed in this case to involve themselves in substantial matters of national security, but not apparently to discuss these substantial matters of national security with the National Security Advisor. This does seem to me to be an absolute matter of substantial absurdity.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman has been consistent over many, many years in expressing these concerns. I would gently point out to him that the situation which he describes as absurd is the same situation that we inherited from the previous government. And he's asked me about the National Security Advisor. Let me say something. He's a very experienced member of this House, so let me say something to him about the National Security Advisor. Over the past year, this government has rebuilt our international relationships, led on the global stage, and signed new agreements with multiple countries to safeguard our security and to grow our economy. National Security Advisor is doing an excellent job, and if he doesn't believe me, maybe he should speak to Steve Whitcroft.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share the fury of the Speaker with the collapse of this trial, as I'm sure all members do. This former Conservative Party researcher escaping justice is a huge disappointment. I'm really pleased that my honourable friend has been able to be so unequivocal about the facts of this case. It's extraordinary that, having listened to that, the Leader of the Opposition should carry on almost as though his statement hadn't existed, because he had answered many of the questions that that she was posing, or that she was choosing to ignore. But can he tell us, in terms of the changes that have happened since, can he be sure that if this offence took place now under the current legislation, that we would be more able to pursue this criminal conviction? And if not, can he tell us what he's doing to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, I'm grateful to him, not because it is actually a very useful question, and parliamentarians should be asking themselves the kind of question that the honourable member has just asked me. Yes, I can give him that assurance, and from this dispatch box on many occasions I have made clear the importance that this government attaches, as I'm sure the previous government did, to the National Security Act. It was a groundbreaking piece of legislation, and I previously, as the right honourable gentleman, my predecessor will acknowledge, on numerous occasions I've paid tribute to those who've been involved with it. His question is the right one. The NSA closed the loopholes that we are essentially debating today. So I can give him those assurances that our legislative framework is in a much better place than it was a couple of years ago. That said, because this government takes these matters incredibly seriously, we constantly look at the legislative framework to assure ourselves that it's appropriate. We work very closely with Jonathan Hall KC, who has made recommendations on behalf of a request from government about our legislative framework, and we've made a commitment that wherever there's a requirement for more legislation, we will bring it forward.
Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Integrated Review refreshment stated that the Chinese Communist Party posed a threat to our people and our security was in fact published the very day these two men were arrested. But that in itself is a red herring, because the Bulgaria case proved that the jury is to decide whether or not a country is or could be in the future a threat, and it is not for the government alone to prove that. Yes. Now, the Minister told this House at our last UQ that the government demanded that the Chinese chargé d'affaires come in and be demarched. Did a Minister do that, or did an official do it? And my second question is, given that the House has been told how disappointed the government is by this outcome, what repercussions is the government choosing to put on the Chinese Communist Party, given they seem to be quite clear that the guilt and the evidence is there? Will they be cancelling JETCO? Will they be putting in place sanctions? Or will they be banning the embassy? And if they won't act, why not?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady has, of course, a very close personal interest in this case, and it will be well understood by members right across the House why she's expressed concerns today and previously. Now, I'm sorry that she doesn't feel that the government's response is adequate, but I will, and I give her this assurance, I will endeavour to ensure that this government does as much as we possibly can to work with her and her right honourable friend to ensure that she can have the confidence that the matters that she's referred to aren't able to happen again. She specifically asked me about the démarche that I referenced in it was a statement, not an urgent question, on the 15th of September. I can tell her that obviously, as she will know, that was done through the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, but I'll come back to her with more details about that should she wish.
Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement and introducing some facts to this debate. I can see that some alternative realities have come crashing down. But I do want to focus on the future and the commitment he's given to protect democratic life in the UK, in particular the cyber security measures. I mean, he will know this will rely at least in part on the Computer Misuse Act 1990. If memory serves right, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was when a 386 Amstrad was the best computer you could get. He will know many people think this Act fails to distinguish between malicious actors, state or otherwise, and cyber security professionals working in the public interest, perhaps a democratic interest. Can he commit to looking at this anomaly? Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to him, not least for the point he made about facts matter. They really do. And that's why I've come to the House today in order to set out facts so members across the House can make a judgment about how they wish to proceed. I also think he makes a very important point about both cyber security and the ongoing review of the Computer Misuse Act. I can give him an assurance that we take these matters incredibly seriously. In fact, I will have more to say about it shortly.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister in his place and I have been friends for many, many years, and so it gives me no pleasure to say this. The statement that he has read out today, no doubt under instruction, has thrown out more chaff, set up more straw men than a Russian disinformation campaign. It's pure fabrication to claim that those are the relevant points, and sadly he knows it. He knows it because we discussed many of these issues when he was in opposition and I was in his place. He knows it because the various different security and defence reviews that have been updated in the last 4 years have set out the clear position of the threat. He knows it because when I sat or stood at the dispatch box, as he does, on the 15th of April 2024, I made clear the position of China being a threat. And he knows it, I'm afraid, because the truth is the Right Honourable Lady, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, set out exactly the right question. Yeah. And that is that the DPP has asked a very clear question. Why have we not had the information in time for these cases to proceed? He didn't say that the evidential threshold wasn't met. If it had not been met, then this arrest should never have happened, and he should be rightly hauling the head of MI5, the head of the Counter-terror police, and the Treasury solicitor before him for abuse of power. He's not doing that because he knows the threshold was met. Instead, he should read the words of the DPP. The threshold is no longer met. Now, no longer means that there has been a change. There has been a change because something has changed. Now, that change could either be a commission or an omission. And from what we've heard today, from the way that the government has very carefully used language, it sounds much more likely that something has not been done than that it has. Now, as my friend knows, simply ignoring an order is not the same thing as not receiving one. And I'm afraid what this has done and what this statement does is advertise that the UK is not willing to defend itself against threats from hostile states. And I know that's not a position that he wishes to advocate.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman is, of course, as the House will know well, personally invested in this issue. And honourable members will understand the history and the reasons for the concerns that he's expressed. And I understand why he takes the opportunity to express them today and on other occasions. Now, the government fundamentally agrees with some of the concerns he's expressed, though clearly not with his subsequent analysis. Now, he'll have noted the point that I've made today about the issuing of guidance from the MPSA. We've published that today, and I hope that he will acknowledge the determination that exists from myself as the Minister and from colleagues right across government to provide assurances and to satisfy the concerns that he has. And one of the ways in which we'll do that is through the Defending Democracy Task Force, which he was a founding member of. I can say to him and to the House that provides the fulcrum point for us dealing with many of these matters right across government. It is something that has had its mandate refreshed by the Prime Minister, and it is a mechanism that we invest a lot in. It will seek to provide us with some of the answers that we need to give him the assurance that he seeks. I hope that he will understand that I'm stood ready to meet with him and the Honourable Lady to further discuss any concerns that they might have. He may not be satisfied today, but I will do what I can to provide that satisfaction and assurance as we go forward.
Jogi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents in Newcastle Lyme will welcome the clarity from the Minister that China is indeed a threat. And let me finish. Those threats to our national security don't just take place here, they take place overseas too. And I'm increasingly troubled, Madam Deputy Speaker, by the actions of the Chinese government in former British colonies across the world, not least in Africa. They are looting minerals, destroying nature and damaging democracy. This impacts us here too. And for far too long, Britain's been missing in action. We've let China run riot, and enough is enough. So can I ask the Minister, what engagement has he had with the Soft Power Council to ensure that they keep national security in mind as they carry out their work? And can I urge him to work with colleagues across government, particularly in the Foreign Office, because we need to get serious with China and fast, and that requires a cross-government approach.
Well, I absolutely agree with him that these are matters requiring of a cross-government approach. I mean, that is precisely the way that this government seeks to proceed with them. I mean, I think it is fair to say that the government has referenced concerns about the issues that he's raised on a number of occasions, but I'd be very happy to discuss them with him further should he wish to do so.
David Davis.
The Minister used the Rousseff case in his own defence. In that case, the Court of Appeal set the clear precedent that the appropriate definition of an enemy state is not down to what the government says, it's a state which behaves like an enemy.
Exactly that.
The judge stated plainly, and I quote him, "There is no reason, in our view, why the term an enemy should not include a country which represents a current threat to the national security of the United Kingdom." End of quote. So throughout the duration of this case, there's been ample evidence, including from the ISC, from the current director of MI5 and others, that China represents a threat to our national security, including at the time when Mr. Berry and Mr. Cash were acting as spies. So the Prime Minister's comments on this are frankly nonsense, and it's time, frankly, that we stopped kowtowing and took a stand against China. Now, if the Minister means what he said in terms of future dealings, will he start by doing what a number of people have called for and refuse to approve the espionage centre masquerading as an embassy at the Royal Mint? Will he reject it and tell the Chinese effectively that enough is enough?
Well, I always listen to what the Right Honourable Gentleman has to say, but that doesn't mean that I always agree with it. In fact, I don't agree with it today, and I'm not sure it's especially helpful to refer to the application made by China for an embassy in the way that he did. I can give him the assurance that I've given the House previously about the importance that we attach to national security in the context of that particular issue. I hope that he understands that the issue relating to the embassy is not a matter for me. There is a quasi-judicial process in place, and it is a matter for the Secretary of State for MHCLG. But the previous Home Secretary, the previous Foreign Secretary, have been crystal clear about the national security implications that underpin that decision.
Dr. Gibbons-Sunder.
Deputy Speaker, look, all of us across this House have an interest in protecting and preserving our democracy. Clearly, we have threats to our democracy, both internally as well as externally. Now, the Minister covered a little bit around the elections bill, but can they set out in more detail what the safeguards, what the protection will be for our democratic institutions and indeed for this place?
Well, I'm grateful to him, and it is a really important question that he's asked, because in July, the government published a policy paper outlining its proposals for an election and democracy bill, which we will introduce as the elections bill as soon as parliamentary time allows. Our intent is to modernise our democracy so that it is fit for the 21st century, including reinforcing safeguards against foreign influence in our elections. Now, in relation to political finance, and honourable members may want to listen very carefully to this, in relation to political finance, Tough new rules will require parties to assess companies they are receiving donations from against a series of tests, proving their connections to the UK and to Ireland. This will end the status quo where a new company, registered today, owned by anyone, funded from anywhere, without even a single day of trade, can donate and have influence in UK politics. The introduction of Know Your Donor checks will increase scrutiny of donations, requiring recipients to conduct enhanced checks to decrease the risk of illegitimate donations entering our system, guarding against foreign interference. It will be very interesting to see whether honourable members opposite vote for it or not.
Sir Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister said categorically and very carefully that the National Security Advisor took no decisions as to the contents of the evidence provided to the CPS. So would he clarify to the House, did the NSA have any influence at all, direct or indirect, whether about provision or omission of the contents of that evidence by his own deputy that led to the collapse of the trial?
Minister.
Yes, I can give him that assurance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Minister for his absolute clarity today. And he mentioned new measures. And I wonder if he could provide further detail on the measures he's announced today and how they'll protect parliamentarians, councillors and those in public life across the UK from foreign interference.
Yes. Well, the proposals contained within the elections bill will go a long way to hopefully providing that kind of assurance. But I again reference the importance of the work being done by the Defending Democracy Task Force. This is a mechanism that we inherited from the previous government, but it brings together ministers, law enforcement and senior officials to look very carefully at these issues and make sure that we've got the right resources in the right place. I hope very much that this will be a shared endeavour across this House to ensure that wherever there are attempts to interfere with our democracy, wherever there are attempts to harass and intimidate elected representatives, that we can stand together as a House against those threats.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister says that it's a matter for another department to decide about the Chinese embassy, and that's certainly true about whether they should have a new embassy or not. But the proposed new embassy is so large that it would be the biggest embassy of any country anywhere in Europe. That has national security implications, and if he wants to encourage people to believe that the government isn't cozying up to communist China, he should make recommendations accordingly. But may I just ask him about the extract that he read from the 1911 Act? I will read a slightly fuller one, though still with ellipses. It says, if any person, for purposes prejudicial to the safety or interests of the state, obtains or communicates to any other person any document or information which might be directly or indirectly useful to an enemy, he shall be guilty of felony. My reading of that is that the felony lies in the disclosure to anyone at all. It doesn't have to be to an enemy directly. So whether or not China was regarded as an enemy at the time, the nature of the sensitive material disclosed itself was a felony, even if it was disclosed to a China that was not regarded as an enemy. So surely the trial should have gone ahead.
Well, as the right honourable gentleman knows, I always value his sage advice and listen very carefully to what he has to say. Given the well, it's true, Madam Deputy Speaker. He asked about the embassy. I mean, given some of the nonsense that's been spouted about the embassy, I think what we do need to do is provide a Privy Council briefing for him and for other Privy Councillors so we can dispel some of this nonsense. And I'll be very happy to take that away. In terms of his second point, as he knows, these are points of law and these are matters for the CPS and for the DPP. They are not matters for ministers.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's clarity on tackling threats that China poses, including to the transnational repression of Hong Kongers in the UK. That will be of real reassurance to the many BNO nationals who live in Milton Keynes. I would like him to go into further detail, particularly in the context of the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee's report on Russia's interference in Brexit and the Nathan Gill case that's just completed on 8 counts of bribery coming from Russia. Of course, he at the time of taking these bribes was a close colleague of some of our MPs on the other side of the House. How will the new elections bill stop the interference from political funding that we are seeing gaining more and more ground here in the UK and has a real threat to our democracy?
Regarding what this statement is actually about. Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to her. The safety and security of Hong Kongers in the UK is of the utmost importance, and any attempt by any foreign power to intimidate, harass or harm individuals or communities in the UK will not be tolerated. In terms of the second point that she made and not wanting to get in trouble with Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just say that using a position of public office to effectively further Russia's malign interest while benefiting financially will not stand. It is a betrayal of our democratic values and of our electorate.
Right.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has told us that his government's assessment of China is a mixture of national security threats and opportunities for engagement, including economically. But will he accept that is exactly the assessment made by the last government? And that combination, with reference to the act we are concerned with and the offence that we are concerned with, doesn't require a country only to present a national security threat, simply that it does so, perhaps in combination with other things. But that's the key point. The Minister's been very clear about that. So can I ask him this? Can we be clear on what happened with the government's evidence? Was it the case that the government could find no evidence on the point of China presenting a national security threat? Was it the case that the government internally decided that the evidence it could find would not meet the CPS's requirements, and if so, who made that determination? Or was it the case that the government did supply evidence to the CPS on that specific point, and the CPS decided it wasn't significant enough? And if it's the latter, will the Minister either publish the evidence to the House, or if he doesn't think that's appropriate, and it may not be, would he give authority to the Deputy National Security Advisor to share that evidence in full with the Intelligence and Security Committee?
Absolutely. Well, I have a lot of time for the Right Honourable Gentleman, not least because he brings an almost unique perspective, both in terms of his understanding of the law and of matters relating to intelligence. I think he correctly made the observation that ultimately any government strategy with regard to China has to take consideration of national security issues, but at the same time, I think any fair-minded, reasonable government has to understand the economic opportunities that exist. Now, as a former Attorney General, I know that he will not recommend that I get into the business of second-guessing judgments and decisions that were taken by the DPP. But in terms of his point about publishing the evidence, hopefully he will have heard the response that I gave a moment ago. I'm responding to your Right Honourable friend's question. In terms of the point, the serious question that was actually raised from the backbenches about publishing the evidence, I hope that he will have heard the response I gave a moment ago.
Slow.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister states, and I quote, that we will take all necessary action to deter those who seek to do us harm, and that includes threats emanating from China. Yet, despite ongoing transnational repression of Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, continued cyber security attacks in this country, members of this Parliament being sanctioned and spied upon, there appears to be no consequences for China, and the UK Government instead gives in to their coercive bullying behaviour. So a very straightforward question. If the Minister is serious about deterring this behaviour and these threats, will he take the necessary action and include China on the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme? Yes or no?
Well, any decision about the enhanced tier of furs will be brought forward to Parliament in the normal way. But what I can say to him is that any attempt by any foreign power to intimidate, harass or harm individuals or communities here in the UK will not be tolerated.
Thank you. Sir Bennett.
Mr. Speaker, since we know the very basic facts, which is that the Director of Public Prosecutions asked for a statement from the government to clarify that at the time of the offence, China was a threat to national security, and then he goes on to say in his letter that such an assurance or evidence or a statement from the government was not forthcoming. We know that the government withheld that vital element of the case. Well, he's shaking his head. But who decided that, in the words of the DPP, it should not be forthcoming? Somebody decided that. He seems to be saying it was the Deputy National Security Advisor, who is somehow accountable for making those decisions, but I question the point, accountable to whom, if not the National Security Advisor?
Let me seek to clarify. The Deputy National Security Advisor, who is a very senior and very highly regarded official with very extensive experience, obviously in matters related to national security, provided a witness statement in December of 2023. This was under the previous government. I made this point earlier on. Further witness statements were requested and provided. And I made this point earlier on, both in February and July of this year. All of the evidence provided by the Deputy National Security Advisor was based on the law at the time of the offence and the policy position of the government at the time. I can give him an assurance. Every effort was made to provide evidence to support this case within the constraints that I've just outlined. The decision about whether to proceed with the prosecution was ultimately taken by the DPP and the CPS, who were hamstrung by antiquated legislation.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I admire the government's attempts to pin this on the previous Conservative government. It's an endeavour I'd usually join them on, but on this occasion I can't, because the argument simply doesn't stack up. The argument seems to hinge on the Conservative government's classification of China as a threat to national security. That's not a formal classification, that's one that needs to be substantiated, and the government seems to be arguing that it wasn't, because, for instance, in the Integrated Review refresh of 2023, it was merely described as an epoch-defining challenge. And yet in that same paragraph in that report, it talks about the Chinese Communist Party as presenting state threats to the UK's democracy, economy and society. In reports by the Intelligence and Security Committee of the same year, we talk about its ambition at a global level posing a national security threat to the UK. And we have heard other testimonies today from MI5 and others. And so my question to the government is, was this the sort of evidence that was provided to the CPS? If not, why not? And whose decision was it not to present this kind of evidence?
There is, I'm afraid, a fundamental flaw in the honourable gentleman's question. These activities took place under the previous government and under the legislation that was in place at the time. It isn't about seeking to blame the previous government, but it is a statement of fact to say that these activities, about which there is concern right across the House, took place in the previous Parliament and under the previous legislative framework. That is just a statement of truth.
I'm very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, who I respect very much indeed, that his answer to the question put by my right honourable friend, the former Attorney General, suggests more questions than he gave answers. Is he seriously suggesting that the National Security Advisor, with all of his links to Group 48 and to Ground View, had no involvement whatsoever in the advice that went to the Crown Prosecution Service? And would the Minister, whilst he's about it, clarify the apparent conflation of this country's economic ties with China, which he appeared to give in mitigation for the mess that the government appears to have got itself in?
Well, I respect him as well, and I hope that he will understand that any government will seek to balance issues relating to national security as well as issues relating to economic prosperity. I think that is not an unreasonable way in which to proceed. I do just want to pick him up about one point, though. The National Security Advisor does not have any links to Group 48.
Lisa Roberts.
He did.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Diolch yn fawr.
Foreign interference in our democracy is, of course, deeply concerning, and transparency from government, and indeed all legislators, is essential. This includes in relation to past elected representatives, such as Reform UK's former leader in Wales, who has pleaded guilty to accepting bribes from Russia. So to uphold public accountability, will the Minister commit to work with the Attorney-General to publish the names of all individuals interviewed by Counter-terrorism police in relation to the Nathan Gill bribery case? The people of Wales are rightly concerned.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady. She's right. Transparency is important, and if she'll forgive me, I'll look carefully at the point that she's made and take it away. I hope this also means, though, that she will be seeking to support our elections bill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to keep this quite basic, because I think this is where a lot of the public will come from. The government should always want to do everything it can and more to keep the British public safe and our institutions safe. So I don't understand why the government therefore won't do everything it possibly can to at least try to bring this to trial, to at least try to give a jury an opportunity to take their matters into their hands to consider this case. I don't understand why the government are willing to accept advice and not actually put this to trial when they have the opportunity to do so. Will the Minister please commit to publish all minutes from any meetings where matters discussed with the CPS or what the CPS had requested were asked for?
Well, I'll keep this basic as well. This government will do everything that we can to keep the public safe. And she will have heard the response that I gave previously with regard to publishing issues.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The stench emanating from the collapse of this Chinese spy case makes a manure heap seem positively floral. The bottom line, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that everyone's disappointed, everyone thinks there's enough evidence, everyone seems to agree that China is a security threat. And yet the case has collapsed and China has been given essentially carte blanche to carry on spying in the United Kingdom. I have it on good authority that senior figures in Washington now fear that Five Eyes has become Six Eyes. The one thing that has changed since charges were made in April 2024 is the National Security Advisor. So will the Minister commit that the National Security Advisor will appear and answer questions in person to any parliamentary committee that wishes to have those questions answered?
The Honourable Member talks about stench. He's got some brass neck, given what's gone on in his party recently. The National Security Advisor is a special advisor, and given the reference to the United States, I would again point the Honourable Member in the direction of President Trump's policy advisor, who has just this morning praised the contribution made by the NSA.
Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The problem the government has is that the story keeps changing, either each day or within a day. And the Honourable Member who's obviously giving the government position now is giving us one view, which completely contradicts the messages were made by government ministers over the weekend. Clearly, he's referenced huge numbers of meetings that took place, with which, with great disrespect, he wasn't present. So can he agree now that all those meetings and the minutes of those meetings be published so that everyone in this House can understand what has happened? If that's got to be done under certain rules so that the public doesn't get access to that, fair enough. But the reality is that until such time as the government comes clean, the stench of this is going to continue.
Let me give an assurance to the Honourable Member that I take very seriously the points that he has made. Clearly, there will be a legal dimension to all of this, but I'm very happy to go away and look at the point he's made, and I'll come back to him.
Ord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2023, the Intelligence and Security Committee published a report on China in which it wrote that China was a whole-of-state threat. In the government's 2023 public response to the ISC report, the government wrote that it recognises the committee's concerns about the long-term strategic challenge. The ISC had used the word threat rather than challenge. Does the Minister regret that in 2023 the government's response to the ISC report on China did not use the word threat?
Well, with respect to him, I'm not going to get into critiquing whether they should have responded in a different way, because that is a matter for them. But he referenced the important work of the ISC. The government does consider that the ISC has a very important role to play in Parliament. They are obviously independent of government, and clearly it will be a matter for the Chair and for the Deputy Chair and for the wider committee to take a view about how they wish to proceed. But he referenced a specific report. All of that material would have been available to be considered by the CPS.
Dr. Luke Evans.
He is the Security Minister. I've been in here for almost an hour and a half, and I haven't actually heard him say, was China spying on Parliament, or is it even a consideration that it is spying on Parliament?
I've been crystal clear. I think that China, if honourable members will allow me, China poses a series of threats to the United Kingdom. I was very clear about what they were. I specifically referenced a number of particular issues. Couldn't have been clearer about that.
It seems to me, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sorry. That's the other Jim. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for coming forward? But as the Minister is aware, this topical issue is heavy in the hearts of many constituencies throughout this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, as we consider national security has been a threat due to semantics with language, and the general public are asking for openness and transparency. I've been contacted on a number of occasions by concerned constituents of Chinese descent who believe that they are being shadowed by the Chinese Secret Service, and that the decision not to prosecute means that they are feeling even more insecure, even more fearful, and this must be addressed. Will the Minister tell us exactly when the decision was made to classify China as non-threatening, and how will I tell that to my constituents who live in fear right now from this so-called non-threat?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him, as I always am. I think he's making reference to activity that took place under the previous government. But let me agree with his basic point that the public do want to know what's happened, and that's why the government have brought forward a statement today to provide that transparency. But what I also think the public don't want is ministers or politicians interfering in the legal process and either seeking to influence or persuade or cajole senior figures within the CPS, including the DPP. I don't think that that is the right way to proceed. And if members opposite and right around the House step back for a moment, I think hopefully we can reach a consensus that it isn't right that ministers should be second-guessing legal rulings taken by the Crown Prosecution Service.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has comprehensively taken on several strawman arguments, answered questions that haven't been asked, and stuck to his carefully constructed sentences. One such example was ministers and special advisers did not take decisions about that evidence, and they were not cited on the contents. But was any minister, or the National Security Advisor, or any other special advisor, or senior official other than the Deputy National Security Advisor, such as the Cabinet Secretary, cited on the decision regarding the evidence sent to the CPS?
Minister.
Fundamentally, the decision was a decision for the DPP and the CPS, and I couldn't have been clear about the fact that this government has not sought to interfere with that process.
Miller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I listened carefully to the Minister's statement, but questions do remain. The Minister says that China poses threats. So we can know the scale of those threats, will the government now publish in full the China audit? The Minister says the government will act against transnational repression of Hong Kongers here in the UK. So will the government now implement targeted sanctions against the officials in Hong Kong and Beijing responsible for the bounties? And the Minister says the government will legislate against foreign influence. Will he ensure that the new elections bill tackles not only covert, but all foreign political funding tightening up the opportunity for foreign actors to influence our politics through corporate donations?
Well, the honourable member referenced the China audit. I'm sure that he will acknowledge that the then Foreign Secretary came to the House to give a statement specifically on the China audit. The reason that the China audit hasn't been published is because it is at a higher classification than would normally be published. I hope that his second point was at least a tacit welcoming of the government's elections bill. There will be a number of measures in there which I hope that he and his colleagues will be able to support. I think it is important that we seek to work together to transform the political landscape to make it much, much harder for those who seek to interfere in our democracy to do so.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister's made great play for the need to work on a cross-party basis on this issue. Can I gently suggest to him the time to do that was before the case collapsed, not asking us to do that afterwards. The Minister's lent heavily on the idea that it's what officials are willing to say about the threat or otherwise that China presumed, but officials don't make government policy and don't state the positions of the UK government. Ministers do. And so is there any good reason why the government, if it was struggling to find an official to describe in a written statement that China was a threat, they couldn't ask, for example, the former Security Minister, who was happy to do that at the dispatch box, who would give a statement, and many other government ministers, former government ministers, who I'm sure would have happily given evidence that China was a threat and enabled the case to proceed. What possible reason was there for not doing that?
Minister.
The honourable member talks about making great play. That's because I genuinely believe that important matters relating to national security should be conducted in a certain way, and where possible we seek to work across the political divide in order to establish a consensus. I thought there was a slight irony in the point that he went on to make. I agree with him. Ministers are accountable, and if members opposite want to hold ministers to account, that is absolutely a matter for them. What I think is most unfortunate, and I'm not saying that he was responsible for doing it, but others have, where members will seek to blame or infer criticism on officials. I don't think that is the right way to proceed.
Jim Allister.
It seems to me that the Right Honourable Lady, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, put her finger on the nub of this matter. What we know is that in April 2024, the CPS decided that the evidential test was met. And the evidential test was that there was a reasonable prospect of conviction of the offence of passing information useful to an enemy. Then we know that in September 25, the PPS maintained that the evidential test is not met. So what changed? Who changed it? How did we move from the evidential test being met to the evidential test not being met? Was evidence that was before the PPS withdrawn? Was it found to be unreliable? Or did the government fail to substantiate the evidence which enabled the evidential test to be met back in April 2024?
Well, with great respect to him, that's what I was at great pains to explain in my opening remarks.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does the Minister agree that the government has now set a perverse incentive for British officials where admitting espionage problems with China is seen as rocking the boat?
No, I don't agree.
Harry Wilson.
Madam Speaker, the government hasn't had a great record in the court recently. Kneecap's case had been thrown out because paperwork wasn't correct. And now we have the spy case not proceeding because evidence wasn't provided. The facts of the matter are this, that China now controls many of our supply chains. China holds a lot of our national debt, and China is an important part of the economic framework in the United Kingdom because of investment in strategic industries. The general public may not understand the intricacies of how a case is built up and who's involved in it. But can the Minister understand that despite his excuse-ridden statement today, many people in the public might be coming to the conclusion that national security is being sacrificed because the government is not prepared to deal with the increasing economic dependency that we have in China?
No, I don't agree with him. There will be those, including in this House, who will seek to simplify the nature of the relationship to a single word. I think more sensible, fair-minded colleagues, and certainly the public, will understand that there are difficult choices that have to be made. But fundamentally, this government's approach will always be to ensure that we put our national security first. I've been crystal clear about that today. I've been crystal clear about it previously. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't seek to look for economic opportunities to trade with a country where there will be some economic advantage in us doing so. That seems to me entirely reasonable, completely pragmatic, but we will proceed on the basis that our national security comes absolutely first.
Ben Obsejective.
Deputy Speaker, last month the Security Minister came before the House and stated that he wasn't happy with the decision not to prosecute. I asked him why the government was dithering over formally challenging China, having excluded them from the enhanced tier of furs, and he suggested that the government was not doing this. Subsequent revelations have suggested that the government has acquiesced to Chinese threats to withhold investment and to waive the outstanding monies owed to Xinye. Would the Minister like to correct the record, explain why China isn't in the enhanced tier, given we are discussing spying for China? And could he clarify what role the National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell has played in deciding that they should not be classified in the enhanced tier alongside Russia and Iran?
Minister.
Well, extremely disappointed was the way that I described it both on the 15th of September and again today. I would gently say to the Honourable Member that he shouldn't believe everything that he reads in the papers, but he did ask me about furs. I hope he heard the response I gave some moments ago, where I said that we look very carefully at any decisions about placing a particular country on the enhanced tier of furs. Furs is an important part of the National Security Act. There were those, including on his side of the House, who said that we weren't going to roll it out. We rolled it out on the 1st of July. I said we were going to roll it out on the 1st of July, and we did. We looked very carefully at how we can most effectively use that tool, and we'll continue to look closely at that, but any decisions about the enhanced tier will be brought forward in the normal way.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government says that they want to take a long-term and strategic approach to China, but that's exactly what China does, whether it's increasing control over supply chains to gain leverage over the West, whether it's their Belt and Road programme and the debt trap diplomacy associated with that abroad. This is nothing less than a concession to an authoritarian regime, and this plays into their hands as they want to continue gaining economic and military leverage over the West. The head of the CPS said that he requested evidence from the government to allow the case to proceed. The government did not provide this evidence. Why not? And is it still the government's view that it's impossible to argue in court that China is a threat?
Minister.
With respect to his final questions, I think I've taken every opportunity to try and provide the government's response to those. I wasn't entirely clear of his critique of a long-term strategic approach, whether he thinks it's a good thing or not a good thing. I think it is a good thing that governments think carefully and strategically about their role in the world and the nature of the relationships that they have with countries like China. Yes, we have to be clear-eyed. Yes, we have to always defend our national security. But yes, we also have to ensure that we look for opportunities to contribute to economic growth as well.
Point of order to do with this very statement. Point of order, Neil O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like you, I am one of the parliamentarians currently sanctioned by China. And like many members of this House, I am left wondering whether it was not just our officers that were spied on, but our families, our homes and our children. And in the absence of a trial, I have no way of finding out what happened. Now, the Minister's been asked multiple times during this session whether he will publish the minutes of the meetings in which this case was discussed. We know from the DPP that over months and months they asked again and again for evidence which was not forthcoming. But without the minutes of those meetings, we are not able to find out what was asked for, why it was refused, or who made that decision. Madam Deputy Speaker, what means are available to this House for us to get hold of the minutes of those meetings, which the government does not want to publish? What parliamentary means can we have so that we can get hold of the minutes in which this was discussed, in which these decisions were made, so that we can find out the truth?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. I thank the honourable gentleman for some notice of that point of order. He's absolutely correct. He and I are one of 2 of 4 sitting MPs who are sanctioned by China. I have been advised to say that he should seek advice from the Table Office as a first step to see how these documents can be published. Another Minister has said repeatedly in responses to colleagues across the House that some material may or could be made public at some point. I'm not sure what that material will be or on which format, but I have no doubt that he will seek advice from the Table Office to make sure that information is made available if it can. Unless the Minister wishes to respond to that point of order, I will let that fall and move on to the next statement. If colleagues are settled, we come to the second statement on digital ID. Secretary of State.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have always believed in giving people power and control over their lives. Control over the public services they use, how they access childcare, benefits and housing support. Control over their data and who sees it. And control over the choices they make to rent or buy a home, apply for a job, open a bank account, and much more besides. In the age of the smartphone, we can take this control quite literally into our own hands. But too often, it feels like we're at the mercy of a system that doesn't work for us as well as it should. One with endless form filling and bureaucracy just to prove who you are, where you might need your passport to apply for a job, your national insurance number to pay tax, your driving licence to buy a pint or a glass of wine, if you're lucky enough to be asked. And most frustratingly of all, you might have to rummage around in a drawer looking for an old electricity bill just to open a bank account or join the library or enrol your children in school. It's time to fix this, to put power back in people's hands, to get more out of our public services and to bring the UK into the modern age. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are 3 reasons why we want to introduce a new free digital ID available to all UK citizens and legal residents above the age of 16. First, it's about giving people greater agency over their lives. In over 15 years as a local MP, I think I've lost count of the number of people who've come to me because they have struggled to get the public services they need or had to battle for support from different parts of the welfare state. I'm sure many honourable members will know this is a frustratingly similar story. They're passed from one person to another, asked to repeat their story and provide basic information time and time again, that they're made to fit into a system rather than the system working for them, which ultimately leaves them feeling like they're a number on a list, not a human being with a life. Bringing in a new digital ID is about far more than replacing numerous bits of paper just to prove who you are. It's about changing the way the state interacts with its citizens through what I like to see as a new digital key that unlocks better, more joined up and effective public services which actually talk to one another and fit around you. In building our new system, we will learn from the experiences of other countries, some of whom have had digital ID for over 20 years. Many show us just how transformative this can be. In Denmark, a graduate applying for jobs only has to log into a portal once, and their ID automatically links to their school records, saving them retyping their qualifications each time. In Finland, a parent can go online to register their children for daycare without uploading a payslip or putting in their salary, and the site automatically calculates the right fee. And in Estonia, a digital ID means that when you have a baby, you don't have to go to a local office to register the birth or sign up for childcare benefits or apply for nursery places. It happens automatically from day one in the hospital, so parents are free to focus on what matters most. Digital ID has the potential to empower millions of people like this right here in the UK, with quick, effective, seamless and secure integration between different government systems. We know that the Tell Us Once service makes the process of registering a death more straightforward, but we shouldn't have to wait till the end of someone's life to offer them joined-up personalised support. So our new system will help modernise government services to fit around people's lives rather than forcing them to fit into the system. The second reason for introducing digital ID is to offer greater security and actually greater control over your own data. Other countries who've introduced digital ID find that digitally checked credentials are far more secure than physical documents. They are much less likely to be lost or stolen. They've reduced errors and mistakes, and they've helped crack down on fraudsters who can ruin people's lives. Privacy and security will be hardwired into the system from the start. There will be no pooling of people's private information into a single central data set. It will be a federated data system, and user control will be at the heart of our plans. With a digital ID, you could end up having more choice over what you show the world, not less. So if you're buying a drink at the bar, instead of showing a physical driving licence revealing your full name and address, you'll be able to prove that you're over 18 without even showing your exact birthday if you don't want to. We will ensure our digital ID operates to international best practice standards for data security and privacy. And we're working closely with the National Cyber Security Centre to ensure it keeps pace with the changing threats we face. The third and final reason for introducing digital ID is to deliver greater fairness by showing exactly who has the right to work here in the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, digital ID is not a silver bullet to tackling illegal immigration, but it will be a deterrent to would-be migrants who are considering coming to the UK, alongside all the other action we're taking. And making ID checks both mandatory and digital for all employers will provide us with far more actionable intelligence so we can move swiftly to identify rogue employers who aren't following the rules. Under this government, illegal working arrests have gone up 50% in the last year. That is progress, but our digital ID will help us to do more. It will be mandatory for right-to-work checks by the end of this Parliament, helping tackle illegal working, cracking down on rogue employers, creating a level playing field for those employers who actually do the right thing, and giving people who do have the right to be here the cast iron guarantee that this is your country and you are welcome in the UK. In order for our new ID to be both effective and fair, it must be genuinely inclusive. That is non-negotiable for the government and for me personally. Currently, around 1 in 10 UK adults don't have a passport or a driver's licence to prove their identity, and around 1.5 million people don't have a smartphone, laptop or tablet or are digitally excluded for another reason. We're already making progress with our Digital Inclusion Action Plan. We'll continue to work closely with all the relevant organisations to understand the barriers to inclusion, how they can be overcome, so we bring everyone into the system. I want to hear directly from honourable members across the House about these matters, and from those in the digital identity sector who've got so much experience to learn from. We'll consider physical alternatives to the virtual document and face-to-face support for those who need it, like the 5% of UK households who don't have home internet access. But ultimately, we want Britain to be a country where everybody has digital skills and access to be part of the modern world, including through our new digital ID to unlock more effective services and support. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will launch a full consultation on our plans by the end of this year, including with parliamentarians, the devolved administrations and members of the public. Legislation informed by this process will follow shortly afterwards. I know there are many questions honourable members will have, and I really look forward to taking them. But let me just say this. 92% of people over 16 already have a smartphone. Many of us already use digital credentials held in our phone wallets, from tickets to events and online banking to storing boarding passes. People should expect the same service from the government. Indeed, we should be criticised if we weren't modernising our services to make them more easier and more convenient for the public. Years from now, when we look back, I believe having your ID on your phone will feel like second nature, putting more power directly into people's hands, giving them more control over how they interact with government and a whole range of services. That is something worth striving for, and I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Secretary of State, Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, nearly 3 weeks ago, the Prime Minister unveiled a plan for mandatory digital identity that will fundamentally shift the balance of power between citizen and state. And he didn't announce it here in this House, but at a love-in of the progressive left, sponsored by Labour Together and haunted by the ghosts of Tony Blair. The justification was his own catastrophic failure on migration. He knows it won't stop the boats, and when Brits are forced to have ID as illegal migration continues unabated, it will simply confirm fears of a two-tier society, fueling the division and conspiracy theories that he so arrogantly claims that he is the antidote to. What a cynical mess. Can the Secretary of State set out how this scheme will identify illegal migrants working in the black economy when their gang masters are experts at avoiding any state interaction? She's rather slinked away from these key points, and in her wonderfully innocuous statement about making it easier to join libraries. We have in the official press release this glorious piece of doublethink. It will not be compulsory to obtain a digital identity, but it will be mandatory for some applications. When employment itself requires government-issued identity, you cannot meaningfully consent, Madam Deputy Speaker, unless, of course, you never want to work. And here is the fundamental issue. In a free society, the burden of proof has always rested with government to justify its actions to earn our trust. But mandatory digital identity reverses that. And while today the scheme focuses on work checks, Labour says it wants to extend this type of mandate into more areas of our lives. So can the Minister tell us which areas and where does it stop? Because I understand even 13-year-olds are now being considered. What about those without digital access? Labour has deprioritised gigabit rollout and published a very worthy digital inclusion action plan without any action. The Prime Minister points to Estonia and India as models that we should seek to replicate, despite serious cyber vulnerabilities. The UK's own sign-on system was breached during red team testing this very March. When 2.8 million people petitioned against the plan, the government assured them it would adhere to the highest security standards. So can she confirm to us here today that the system on which her mandatory ID will be built already meets those standards and that the NCSC will publicly back her up? This crafty scheme was not in Labour's manifesto. Even the Cabinet thinks this whole thing is a fantasy. The Secretary of State cannot even bring herself to tweet about it. Why does the Prime Minister keep handing her his steaming messes to scoop up? The migration argument having totally bombed, the migration argument is totally bombed, and you heard it here today. She and the Prime Minister are now reframing this whole thing as the route to better online services. No more rifling around utility bills. Her whole statement today, not an ID you hear today, not an ID, a key. But they are deliberately conflating two very different things. Better, more convenient online services were already coming in. We already had right to work and rent checks, convenient DBS checks, driving licence renewals, all designed with choice, consent and privacy in mind. Paper options retained, nobody forced down the digital route, and trust as the key. Private identity providers enabled. This is not about Luddites versus modernisers. This is about the fact that Labour cannot resist its big, fat socialist dreams. Centralised databases, state mandations, big money, the exclusion of private sector expertise. Why create this honeypot for hackers? How much is this going to cost? And why should we trust Labour to be the verifier of someone's identity when during the Data Act's passage they would not even commit to recording someone's sex accurately? Let me be clear, Conservatives oppose mandatory digital identity. In principle, in practice. If we believed it was necessary, we'd have introduced it in government, but we chose not to because you can deliver better online services without resorting to a costly, controlling, complex and risky system. This is a cynical distraction from a desperate Prime Minister. He wants people to believe mandatory ID will fix his migration mess, but it will not. Channel crossings will continue until he introduces a real deterrent, but he hasn't got the guts to take on the lawfare industry that made him. We believe that government should empower citizens, not the other way round. That government should earn citizens' trust, not the other way round. Only those entitled to benefit should receive them. Those with no right to be here must leave. But these imperatives are not best delivered by controlling British people instead of those who don't play by the rules. The government that promised to tread lightly on our lives has got its boots out. Will the Secretary of State now kill this plan rather than be the sacrificial lamb for another of this Prime Minister's grubby mistakes?
State? Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is definitely the first time I've been called a big fat socialist. The Honourable Lady asks how this will help crack down on illegal immigration. By making making the digital ID mandatory and digital will really help us get more actionable intelligence about rogue employers and who are doing the checks that they are required to do and who aren't, much more swiftly and automatically. Secondly, the Honourable Lady talks about those who are digitally excluded. As I said in my statement, I take that issue extremely seriously. And we actually have a digital inclusion action plan. They didn't do one for 10 years. If they cared so much about it, perhaps they would have done. She understandably and rightly, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions about having the highest possible standards here, and we will be working to international best practice standards. One of the things I would say is there are not many advantages about lagging behind so many other countries that have digital ID, but one of them is we can learn from their experience when things have gone wrong, how they've improved their security, and that's what we intend to do. But I just want to finish by saying this, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Lady comes to the dispatch box with that fire and brimstone, but I think it's quite interesting about how what she says is different from the Shadow Home Secretary, who back in February backed the idea, saying there were very significant benefits. In August, he said they should consider it. Their leader in June actually said she'd actually moved her position on digital ID, and if it could answer difficult problems, then yes, that's something they would look at. You'd think it was still summer, the amount of flip-flops we're seeing on the other side of the chamber. They're not serious, they're not credible, and until they are, they're not electable.
Select Committee Chair, Chian Warren. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State is absolutely right to champion access to a consistent, trusted digital ID. All of us online have digital IDs aplenty already, Facebook, TikTok, HMRC, Tesco's. So she's right to bring the benefits of one digital ID to my constituents. But making digital ID mandatory for everyone seeking work is poking a stick in the eye of all those with security, privacy and/or government capacity concerns. Concerns my committee will be examining as part of our work on digital government. For now, though, could she firstly confirm that people will be in control of their digital ID data and who accesses it, and secondly, say whether it will be procured externally from the private sector or developed in-house by government digital services?
Thank my honourable friend for her question. She's right to raise these very important issues about security, and people rightly concerned about the security of their data. That's why that will be at the heart of our consultation. But in answer to her specific questions, yes, people will control who sees and accesses their data, and we absolutely expect this to be designed and built within government, building on the one login.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of this statement, but quite frankly, I'm disappointed that this is how we start the conversation on digital ID in Parliament. We Liberal Democrats believe that freedoms belong to citizens by right, and yet the government's plans for digital ID for every single working person risk eroding the hard-won freedom to control the way we live our lives. They risk excluding millions of vulnerable people from their own society, and they risk wasting billions in public money chasing expensive solutions that won't work. It is yet again a gimmick to tackle irregular migration, something I'd hoped was reserved for the Conservatives. Yet again, by eroding public trust with these rushed, retrofitted policies, the government have squandered an opportunity to use technology to improve public service by bringing people with them. And all of this was announced weeks before it could be scrutinised by Parliament for a scheme that will impact every single working person in the UK. Any claims from this government that this is non-compulsory and give agency are poppycock in reality. As a requirement for the right to work, it is mandatory ID in all but name, and even the Secretary of State said it just now. Where is the choice in that? Last week, the Foreign Secretary proposed issuing digital IDs for teenagers. This is clear government mission creep, and it's dangerous. Liberals have always stood up against the concentrations of power, and for good reason. We've seen the government's abject failure to secure people's data before. Ask the victims of legal aid agency data breach or armed forces personnel who are victims of the MOD data breach, whether they have faith in the government to keep their most personal data secure. So I ask the government, how can the public have trust in them to manage a system that will manage the data of almost the entire population? And for the 8.5 million people without foundational digital skills, like my constituent Julie, who doesn't own a smartphone and is fearful of being excluded from employment, from healthcare and from other essential services, can the Minister commit to publishing an impact assessment and come forward with a plan to reduce the risk of further marginalisation? All of these serious concerns, from privacy to exclusion, come at a staggering cost. This scheme will cost the taxpayer billions, money that will be wasted on a system doing little to tackle the government's stated aims of immigration enforcement. Meanwhile, our public services are crumbling. So finally, I ask the Minister, how much taxpayer money is the government prepared to waste on this scheme for which they have no mandate and no public support before they admit it does not work? Thank you.
I'll try and keep this brief, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I said in my statement, he raises a number of different issues there. On digital exclusion, we have a digital inclusion action plan. We are going to be spending £9.5 million in local areas to help people who are currently excluded get online. We will be publishing a full consultation on this. I'm sure she will feed her views in. It's interesting that her leader said last month, if a UK system was about giving individuals power to access public services, I could be in favour. So I hope they actually drop this partisan approach, work with us to deliver. And I would say to her, and to many honourable members, many other countries have digital ID systems. The EU is rolling out a digital ID systems in all member states. I know this lot don't like it. So I think we need to keep a little bit of perspective.
We have two select committee statements and a substantial debate later on this evening, so this will have to conclude in 45 minutes. I ask colleagues to keep their questions short and the Minister to keep their responses even shorter and on point. I call Joe White.
Speaker, just over a month ago, I visited Tallinn in Estonia, and to understand why digital ID is so popular with the old and the young, and those who you define as the digitally excluded. And they told me it's because they have control over their data that's held by the state. Right. Yeah. They can see it, who has accessed it, and who else can see it.
Yeah, that's right.
But what was critical, they're a state where Russia is on their borders. They have confidence, they have absolute control over their data security. I believe that there are lessons that we can learn. In the UK, my constituents want to know who is in this country, who is in this country, who is legally entitled to use our public services, and who is entitled to work here. Does the Minister agree that we need to learn from countries like Estonia and Denmark on these matters? Yeah.
Secretary of State.
Yes, I do, and I think she's also right to say citizens of this country rightly want to know who has a right to be here, who has a right to work here, and I think that's a very important principle.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I'm wholly opposed to this, and I know that so many of my constituents are. Whilst the government has talked about so-called economic benefits around accessing services and digitalising how we interact with government, my constituents are concerned about impingement on liberty and shifting relationship between the individual and the state. The state must always be accountable to the individual. So can the Minister rule out that this system will never be a system by which the government can track location, that it cannot track consumer spending habits, and that it will not track social media activity?
Yes.
Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate the Secretary of State setting out the ambitions the government has. I do feel I have to pick her up on something, though, because she said this would be free. Ultimately, the taxpayer will have to pay for it. Now, the costings that we've seen circulating are about £1 to £2 billion to create it, and another £100 million each year to run it. We know the cost of a data breach, the OBR has suggested, could be 1.1% of GDP. In fact, our entire growth, were it to happen to the economy. Marks and Spencer's, Jaguar Land Rover and Co-op alike all show us this. So can she give us, if not at least a ballpark figure, for the capital and revenue costs that she's envisioning for what she set out?
Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. I think we also need to look at the potential benefits of this in terms of savings from cracking down on fraud, from making services more effective and efficient. And clearly the eventual cost of this will depend on the design and build, which is what we're consulting on, and I'm sure she and many other colleagues will feed in their views.
Morrissey.
Thank you. Given digital ID won't stop illegal immigration and will be a further erosion to our civil liberties, will the Minister confirm that perhaps the Prime Minister only announced it as a deterrent to those seeking to topple him at the Labour Party conference? Or what actually is the purpose of this policy?
That's nonsense.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been contacted by a large volume of Warrington North constituents in recent weeks whose healthy scepticism that digital ID will make a material difference in tackling illegal immigration I share. As much as I do think there is scope for better digital integration across the public sector more generally, the Secretary of State's statement talks a lot about hypothetical things, about things this could do in the future, when the only use case that has been confirmed so far is right-to-work checks. Can we be clear on what the use cases are we intend to pursue and over which timescale, so we can decide whether or not this is a path we want to go down with the information we need to make that decision?
Minister.
These aren't hypotheticals. They are looking at other countries and what they have used this system to do to deliver more effective government and other services to their citizens. We have proposed having a mandatory right-to-work check by the end of the Parliament, but I do believe in future there are many really important voluntary ways in which people get better access to services and support, and we'll be consulting on that fully when we come forward with those detailed proposals.
Ben Obstajecti.
Madam Speaker, I am firmly against the government's plans to introduce digital ID, alarming state overreach. This pledge, seemingly on a whim, given it made no appearance in the Labour manifesto and there is no mandate for it, seems to be a desperate attempt to shore up their moribund pledge to smash the gangs. There appears to be little appetite or enthusiasm for this proposal on the benches opposite, and the claim that it will curb illegal immigration, given we are still offering asylum seekers somewhere to live and an Aspen card of £49.18 per week, is not supported by the evidence. Having received a huge amount of correspondence on this, what guarantees can the right honourable lady give my constituents that the scheme can be afforded, that their data will be safe, and that it will never be used to track their use of services?
Secretary of State.
I've already said it wouldn't be used for that. And I would just say to the honourable gentleman, when you look at how this has been used in many other countries, it has made accessing government services, public services, much easier, much quicker, and much more efficient. I think that there is some scaremongering over this. When you look across other countries and what they're doing, it really has made government fit around people rather than make people fit into government and its different services, and I think that's a huge benefit.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the serious threats that digital ID poses to civil liberties, our data security and the risk of data being handed over to US tech giants, I'm firmly opposed to digital ID. However, isn't it also a real big waste of money, and shouldn't the government be instead focusing on what's the #1 priority of people across the country, which is tackling the cost of living crisis? And wouldn't the money from this better be pushed into that while safeguarding civil liberties?
Minister.
I think providing better value for taxpayers' money by getting services to work quickly, more effectively and more efficiently, cracking down on fraud, reducing error and waste is actually a really important part of delivering for the British people.
Martin Wrigley.
Speaker, I fully agree with many of the comments made so far, and I too have had many comments from my constituents. This will not help in areas of digital exclusion, especially where there is poor phone coverage, as there is in many parts of Devon. Nor will it stop rogue employers who currently employ cash in hand and don't look at the books. Why will they look at the phone? They won't. It must be optional. But can the Minister please assure us that this will be built along the lines of sovereign AI, and we will not hand control of a system like this with people's lives to companies like Palantir?
We absolutely won't. And may I say to the honourable gentleman, if he would like to write to me with more details within his constituency about areas and groups of people who are digitally excluded, I make an absolute commitment we will do everything possible to tackle that problem.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think many of the members here fundamentally have misunderstood the proposal. It's actually about putting power in the hands of the citizen and not the state. This is information that the state already holds and allows them to access it. On fraud, 11.4 billion is lost in scams last year. 1.8 billion per year is lost due to identity theft. Does the Minister see a role for digital ID and cracking down on the growing problem of fraud and identity theft?
Minister.
I absolutely do, and one of the points I think we need to make is it is the countries that have introduced this have actually found it helps tackle that it makes it, you can often lose those forms of identity, or they can be used by other people. And I think this will really help tackle that problem, as well as make services more effective and efficient.
Francois.
Thank you, Mum. I'm completely opposed to digital ID cards as a matter of principle. It was not in the Labour Party manifesto. They have no mandate for it. It's basically a multi-billion-pound gimmick to try and address the fact that small motor arrivals are up a third since they came to power. They haven't got the faintest clue of how to stop them. So can I ask two very specific questions of the Minister? One, how much, even approximately, will it cost to bring this system in, even as a ballpark figure? And secondly, if it is to be mandatory, which would be completely wrong, what will be the penalty for a citizen who refuses on principle to have one?
I don't know why the honourable gentleman thinks you shouldn't be required to prove that you have a right to work in this country. That seems like a really reasonable thing to do. And, well, 92% of people aged over 16 do have a phone. And as I said in an answer to a previous question, part of how we design and develop this whole programme, that's what we're consulting on. And obviously further details about costings will be coming out in due course.
On the Public Accounts Committee, we regularly hear examples of government IT systems which are out of date, inefficient and open to fraud and hacking. That's the reality of it. So in looking at other countries like Estonia and Denmark, we should also look at how they've completely reformed and recreated modern, comprehensive IT systems where there is easy access from the individual. In Estonia, as I understand it, an individual has a right to know which parts of government have actually been into their IT systems and looked at them.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We will be learning the lessons from those other countries. People are able to see actually who accesses their data. It gives them more power control. And if I can, Madam Deputy Speaker, I didn't reply to the second question from the Honourable Jeff. There won't be a sanction or a penalty for people who don't carry that. There will remain penalties on employers who don't obey the law and do those checks, but it won't be on the individual.
Sean Berry.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not sure, however many examples the Secretary of State gives from other countries, she will convince the people of Britain that mandatory ID cards fit with our particular values. So, will the Secretary of State listen to the millions who signed the Parliamentary petition, as well as the fighting Yorkshireman Harry Wilcock and the Churchill government of 1952, who considered the abolition of ID cards an important symbol of a society that trusted its citizens?
Secretary of State.
I think the common sense of the British people, when when so many now have online banking on their phones, store so much on their digital wallets, when they look at their friends and neighbours and colleagues across the channel and see so many people right across Europe have this as a matter of course, and it makes their lives simpler and easier, the common sense of the British people will say, we want a bit of that.
Dr. Alison Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Chair of the APPG for Digital ID, I welcome this government's proposals. However, many of my constituents currently have deep concerns and are seeking reassurance. In order to build trust in the digital ID system, it would help if people felt they had a choice and control over whether to use digital ID or not. As such, will the Minister look again at the proposals for mandatory digital ID for working-age adults, allow choice for non-digital alternatives, which incidentally would offer resilience against IT failure, and control over their data with a decentralised or a federated data approach?
The Prime Minister has been very clear that it will be mandatory for right-to-work checks, but I will confirm to my honourable friend, absolutely, we do not want one big centralised data set. It will be federated. That's one of the lessons we learn from other countries. I'm sure there's many more things that we will have to and want to do to make sure people's data is secure. But I believe this will actually give people more control because they'll be able to see who accesses their data, and I think that's a good thing.
Sir John Hayes.
Speaker, if it wasn't so sinister, it would be quaint to hear the Secretary of State say it's international, it's novel, it's modern, and therefore it must be good. Try telling that to Jaguar Land Rover workers, or NMS customers, or post office postmasters and postmistresses. So will the Honourable Lady recognise, would I recognise when I was the Home Office and responsible for national cybersecurity, that when you concentrate data and you make that data interconnected and interoperable, you concentrate risk. Yes. And the risk is to people's lives will be damaged and possibly even destroyed.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He has a lot of experience in this area. We want to learn not just from other countries, but work closely with the National Cybersecurity Centre to make sure we have the highest possible standards of security. We can learn where mistakes have been made, how to put those right. We're determined to do that. But I am very happy to meet with him to discuss this in more detail because we want to get this right.
Rachel Muskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Identifying rogue employers which exploits labour and dodge taxes is one thing. However, holding digital ID versus paper ID makes no difference if the employer refuses to acknowledge that ID. So could she point to the evidence, and I'm really interested to see that, as to how having a digital ID will prevent rogue employment?
My honourable friend is always rightly concerned to see evidence, and when we publish our consultation on this, she will see all of that in there. I think it's really important to understand that by making these checks both mandatory and digital, rather than solely relying, as we do at the present, on getting information from individuals. This I think, can make a real difference in identifying those who are not doing the full range of checks. That will be a step forward. It's not the only thing that we need to tackle rogue employers. There are many other actions that we need to take, but I think it's a good step forward.
Pete Twishart.
Deputy Speaker, just as we opposed ID cards under Tony Blair, we will oppose digital ID under this Labour government as they seek once again to impose this unwanted scheme on a sceptical public. The whole idea of digital ID is an attack on our liberty and privacy, a treasure trove for hackers and those that would hoard personal data. It will do little to tackle illegal immigration and cost billions of pounds. We in Scotland want nothing to do with this Brit card, and the Scottish Government will energetically oppose it. So the question to the Home Secretary is, when we rightly and inevitably oppose this and reject this, will she do the usual UK thing of just imposing on us anyway?
It's not a Brit card. But I must say I'm a tiny bit confused. In March 2021, the Scottish Government published A Changing Nation, How Scotland Will Thrive in a Digital World. And it included plans, and I quote, to introduce a digital identity service for users to prove who they are and that they are eligible for a service. He better make up his mind.
Nadia Whittam, after which I will call Steve Darling. Nadia Whittam.
In my 12 years as a Labour member, but I do know that not a single person has ever told me that what they really need to improve their lives, their community, this country, is mandatory digital ID. It won't tackle irregular working, it undermines civil liberties, it's divisive among the public, and it won't make a difference to people's lives. So I ask the Secretary of State, why are we doing it? Why are we burning political capital and public money on this instead of focusing on the issues that really are impacting our constituents? I worry that this is yet another huge mistake.
Yeah, well said.
I would say to my honourable friend, in the 15 years I've been a local MP, many people have said it can be a nightmare trying to talk to different bits of the public sector, repeatedly giving the same information, telling their story time and time again, and they are concerned about illegal working in this country. I think this is an important step forward in terms of improving the way that the state fits around people's lives, doesn't force them to fit into the system, and that, I think, is an issue that many members across the House have in common with their constituents.
Thank you. May I congratulate the Minister in her new position. I'm also mindful of her previous position where she masterminded the PIP reforms. And also, I'm concerned that she is fast becoming the Minister for Lost Causes with her new proposals before us today. Deputy Speaker, in my constituency, we have an awful lot of people who are, and it's really sobering, how many are digitally excluded. Would the Minister please give us some clear examples of how people will be helped? Because I know I have dozens and dozens of people who are against this in principle, but what about those who are potentially excluded?
We have a £9.5 million digital inclusion fund, which will support local organisations with grants from between £25,000 and £500,000 to help specific groups of people who are currently digitally excluded, to make sure that they can get the benefits of all manner of different private and public sector services that are available online. We'll be announcing those, the results of the application process shortly, but as always, I am happy to meet the honourable gentleman for him to tell me about the specific issues in his constituency, and if we need to do more to make sure everybody is digitally included in this country, we will act.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, here we go again, 15 years after the Conservatives abolished it. I'd say to the naysayers, our passport data, our ID for our driving licences, that's on a database. So we need to be careful about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. But I would say to the Secretary of State, verify, UK Verify, we had Tell Us Once. There have been attempts to do this before. We all log into our HMRC accounts. So we are using digital identification in many ways. But will she be really careful about the challenges that are faced by those? And also, why on earth is it mandatory? In the past, the previous act was for voluntary use, and it was very popular, in fact, interestingly, with migrants who really wanted to have one to prove their access, but they did not have to do it. And it would allow public services then to have the time to work for those who are digitally excluded.
I know my right honourable friend has a huge amount of experience on this issue, and I look forward to discussing it with her. The only area where we're proposing this to be mandatory is for right-to-work checks. We're not proposing it to be mandatory for any other area. And I believe as people start to see those benefits, they will want to have that digital ID on their phone for accessing public services, but also in the private sector. We have to get the security right, we have to get digital inclusion right, but I believe in today's world where so many of us have so much information on our phones, I believe that there has been a shift in opinion, and I look forward to hearing more from her about what she thinks we need to do next.
Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, this ID card is being touted as an idea to do mandatory work checks. It does rather surprise me that the lady in charge of DWP until recently isn't aware that we already have mandatory checks in order to work. Her statement was contradictory. She's saying that it's going to give people more control over their data, but unless you're a multimillionaire that doesn't need to work, you will need to have an ID card. So it's not really optional at all. She has failed to answer questions from many of MPs across this House on how much it will cost. So can she say, how much will it cost?
At the risk of repeating myself, costs will depend on exactly the design and build and delivery of this programme. We will set out further details, but I would say to the honourable lady, I think people would expect, in this country, would expect that people who work here have a right to work here. I think that's an important principle and one I'm proud to support.
Andrew Pace.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome this statement and the consultation? As a contribution towards modernising our public services. Constituents of mine are frustrated by the way they can't interact with the state. Alongside my right honourable friend Bassett Law, I went on a recent trip to Tallinn, and I was struck by not just how digital identity could make things easier, but how it could also drive up uptake of things like childcare and things like the pension credit, and actually provide a service to people. But I was also taken by the fact that in Tallinn it was developed to stop the overreach of the state, and civil liberties are built into the identity. So can the honourable friend ensure that control and data use is a real part of the consultation when it comes out?
I agree with my honourable friend. I think this could give people more power and control over their data, who sees it, who uses it, as well as all the other benefits he rightly sets out.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you. Speaker, the British people did not vote for a two-tiered digital police state run by this failing Labour government. This is undemocratic, authoritarian, and will do absolutely nothing to stop illegal immigration. So will the Minister listen to the overwhelming volume of the public opinion and drop this policy immediately?
Speaker, I recall the debate about the previous attempt to bring in ID cards, and people were very concerned about having to produce them if demanded from the authorities like the police. Now, I understand, I too have been to Estonia, and I understand that this argument has moved on. We have apps on our phones like the NHS, Government One login. We've all got a digital footprint these days. But can my right honourable friend categorically state that at no stage in the future will people be required by the police to produce this digital ID?
I can.
Manuela Patkala.
EU nationals in the UK were guinea pigs for a digital-only status. Serious concerns are still being raised, including access issues which resulted in people being wrongly denied work, housing, education and welfare. Extending digital IDs to the British people will result in another layer of mandatory surveillance and loss of privacy. Can the Secretary of State confirm what independent oversight will monitor data breaches, errors and misuse?
There won't be surveillance, and we're not proposing it being mandatory to access all different types of service. That is just a wrong characterisation of what we're proposing.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The current proposal is that digital ID will be mandatory for right-to-work checks.
by the end of this Parliament. And concerns have been raised with me by constituents that this makes it de facto mandatory for working age people. So can I ask the Minister if she's considered simply sticking with it as a voluntary service so people who wish to can get those benefits of a streamlined ID, and then when it's bedded in, perhaps then look at whether it's necessary to make it mandatory for right-to-work checks? Thank you.
I think we have considered all those different aspects. I think it is right for the Prime Minister to say that it should be mandatory for right-to-work checks by the end of the Parliament to prove that you have a right to be here and to work. I also believe that as we develop this and show the benefits for many other aspects of daily life, which we're not proposing it's mandatory for, I think people will see the benefits of that, and I hope that that will start to shift the debate.
I want to pick up the question about punishment, because I'm confused. The Secretary of State says that to work you have to mandatory have the ID. Yet she said the impetus is on the company, not the individual who won't need to have one. How does that work? Does the individual have to have one? And if they choose not to, does that mean they cannot work? Does that mean they're going to have to claim benefit? Or does that mean they go to prison because they haven't got a mandatory ID?
No, that isn't what it means. What I said was, the specific question was, will there be sanctions or penalties on the person not having them? And I said, no, there won't. As is the case now, if an employer hasn't done the checks that it's required to do, they can face a penalty of up to £60,000 for each individual worker. And they can also, that's under civil penalties, and under criminal, if it's a criminal offence, they can face up to 5 years in jail. But there will not be penalties on the individual or sanctions on the individual.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for her statement, which clearly sets out how far the UK is lagging behind our European neighbours in terms of faster and easier access to services. That said, my constituents are raising two main concerns with me, and I'd be grateful if she could provide some reassurance this evening. One is around why digital ID is required to work when they already have NI numbers, and the other is how digital ID will impact on the most vulnerable residents.
I think she's absolutely, I hope that I have explained why it needs to be mandatory for right-to-work checks and the benefits of that, for help as one part of a tool of different things to crack down on illegal immigration, making sure that vulnerable people, those who do not have access, who do not have smartphones or tablets or the skills, that is extremely important to me. We will be working closely with all of the organisations who can make a difference here, the Digital Inclusion Committee, and we want to look at what more we can do very locally to support groups who we know have the kind of access to get people. I would be very happy to meet with her and talk in more detail about what we might be able to do to support her constituents, because we are determined to make sure Britain is a digitally included country.
Robinson.
Through the Secretary of State, can I thank the Minister to her left, who was in Belfast last week and engaged with the Minister of Communities in the Northern Ireland Executive. He will know, and she should know, that our principled and practical objections to this proposal from 20 years ago remain to this day. But she will also know that since announcement there have been many fanciful and facile comments in Northern Ireland that suggest this proposal would be in breach of the Belfast Agreement. She knows that ideologically, practically, principally and politically, legally, that is wrong. So will she at least confirm today that nothing within this consultation will give an option to anyone to suggest that this policy, if it were to be introduced, would be anything other than across the United Kingdom?
It will be across the United Kingdom, and as the honourable gentleman said, my friend, the Minister for Digital Government and Data, was in Northern Ireland just last week, and he also visited and talked to members of the Irish government. The Good Friday Agreement and the Common Travel Area are absolutely sacrosanct. This will be a UK-wide proposal, and there's nothing that we will do that would ever harm the Good Friday Agreement.
Samantha Niblett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over 20 years ago, I began a career with Espionage, a data company, where we were talking about
about having a unique reference number for everybody in the country. That was to the benefit of companies, so they could make more money off us. Whereas what government's doing is looking to give us access to our own data. So I'm excited by digital ID. But I did ask my constituents what they think on a Facebook post. And I had over 400 responses, really kind and considered. Sorry.
I'm on my feet. Seated. Question.
The question is, with the fors and against all taken into account, and trusting politicians and politics at an all-time low at the moment, what assurances can she give me that she will work with me to ensure that my constituents don't feel like this is being done to them, but being done with them?
I'm sure my honourable friend will send me the results of her survey. I will look through it in detail. I believe that if you can show people that government is changing, it is working around them, meeting their needs and concerns, that is one of the ways in which we build trust, and that's what we're determined to do.
Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents in North Cornwall have been crystal clear with me. They do not want a mandatory digital ID forced upon them. It marks a clear erosion of their civil liberties. And let's face it, the government's track record of data security is poor, to say the least. Many in my constituency don't have phone signal or Wi-Fi, and it's set to cost between £1 to £2 billion to roll it out. 4 times what the government plans to save from the family farm tax. Please, Minister, learn the lessons from the welfare bill, listen to your backbenchers, and don't waste this colossal amount of taxpayer money.
Great clip. I don't really know what the question was there.
Darren Paffy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for the statement and her comments on digital inclusion. Can she say a bit more about how that inclusion strategy might address some of the challenges faced by care experienced young people and care leavers, and will she guarantee that the priority will